Yeah, no, I can just bring them up to us. You know, it might not be you, but you're gonna have to. This meeting will now come to order. Good evening, everyone. This is the Puyallup City Council study session for October 8th. May we all rise for the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you for that. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Adler,
Present.
Councilmember Johnson,
Present.
Deputy Mayor King,
Present.
Councilmember Gilliam,
Present.
Councilmember Whitting,
Present.
Councilmember Dorr, Mayor Castma.
Present. This evening, we will be discussing the budget of which we will have to pass by the end of the year. And with that, we have a number of items on the agenda. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
Motion to approve.
Okay. Moved and seconded. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Okay, let's get right into it. Agenda item number 1A is the general fund, just a presentation on the state of the general fund. City Manager Steve Kirkley, please.
Okay, good evening, Mayor Castma and council members. Welcome to night 1 of 3. So it's going to be a great 3 nights, and tonight will be we have a pretty robust agenda for you this evening. So just wanted to do a brief introduction, and then I'm going to turn it over to our finance director Barbara Lopez. So just to orient you to the 3 nights, tonight is going to be focused on the general fund, which, as you all know, is our operating fund. And so we'll be focusing on that. Tomorrow night, Wednesday, will be on our capital budgets. So that's infrastructure, utilities, parks, streets, etc. And then Thursday night will be the LTAC, Lodging Tax Advisory Committee recommendations, community grants, and then just some general direction. As these are study sessions, there's no votes. You don't actually take votes on items. In the past, there might have been some straw polls or general consensus. That would be helpful for us so that we know when we bring the ordinance back to you for first reading, the budget ordinance and other ordinances related to the budget, that we at least have a general direction of where we think a majority of you are for first reading. That will, the public hearings relating to the budget and the property tax levy will be the last meeting of October, is currently what we have slated. And then after those hearings, then first reading of the ordinances would come in November. And if all goes as planned, you will have the budget adopted by the end of November, which would still leave you 1 additional meeting in December for any other items that you need to do. So that's the plan that we've sketched out. And ultimately, though, it is your decision. So I wanted to just, before I turn it over to Barbara, just to kind of orient you to a few things that you'll see tonight and why you're going to see them. So Amit, if you could do that, start the PowerPoint for me. Thank you. So you have seen this before, but this is really kind of the 3 spheres of influence, I would say, that I think are really important to our community. So you have, obviously, you, the city council, as the elected representatives of the city, represented by your neighbors in our community. Then you have the community, which is really a broad term. That can be the neighbors and our residents, but that also can be business community. It can be customers that use our services. And then you have Team Puyallup, which is kind of our way of talking about the staff. And so one of the things that we have continued to aim for here is organizational excellence. And you see that in one of our core values. Excellence is one of our Team Puyallup core values. And I thank you as council at your retreat in February. You took those 4 core values, the Team Puyallup core values, and said, we want those And so those are service focus, excellence, collaboration, integrity are our 4 values. But to get to organizational excellence, you have to have values. You've got to have strategic planning and you have to have leadership. And ultimately, the leadership starts right here with you all. Your community elected you, and then that you give us vision and purpose and direction, and then we take it and we implement it. You go to the next slide. So some of the things you'll see tonight are, and that's why I wanted to just briefly talk about this. It's very intentional of many of the things that we do, and that is led by you. And so right there at the very top, you'll see the community survey. We're going to go over that tonight. This will be the second time that we've done a community survey. Over the last 3 or 4 years, we've really tried to be intentional, strategic about how we run the city, how we manage the city, how you lead the city. And so right there at the top is a community survey. That should, to a certain extent, inform the vision that your constituents represent you to bring their ideas, their thoughts, what they think are important here to your duty as the council. But we also ask them directly through the community survey. That community survey then informs the strategic plan that you'll hear a little bit about tonight. That strategic plan then informs our budget. And you see priority-based budgeting. You're going to hear a little bit about that tonight. We're taking some baby steps towards that, and you'll see a little bit tonight. We then feed off the greater city strategic plan. We have department plans. So at this point, we have over 50% of the city departments actually have their own individual strategic plan. Some departments are pretty small, so it's hard for them to do a strategic plan. But all our larger departments work on them and have them, and that feeds off the city's plan. And then, of course, we have performance measures that you will see in the strategic plan that are there. And then lean continuous improvement mindset that we continue to embody in our values and in how we do our work. Next slide, please. So bringing this all together, when you have council and community and Team Puyallup all working in tandem and together, I really think it creates you can go to the next, really kind of a synergy there. And go to the next one, please. Thanks. You can keep going, Amit. So that's really at that middle point there where city council, the community, and Team Puyallup all converge together and can all be in alignment. That really is where good government, good governance starts. And so tonight, obviously, is a very important part of that, and it's the budget. And so you're going to hear a lot about that tonight. So thank you, Amit. So the why of this budget. So you will not hear a lot of new things tonight from Barbara, our finance director, or from me. Much of what you heard back at the retreat in February is still the same today. So there really should not be many surprises there. The reality is we have a $4 million deficit. That's a biennial deficit, $2 million each year. Not ideal. I will say that we are fortunate in the sense that we are not like many of our other cities throughout this state and region that have deficits much larger than that. But the reality is we do have that deficit and we have to balance it. Unlike federal government, we cannot adopt a budget that's not balanced. We have to balance it. And so the challenge here is to maintain our current service levels. And so that's what this budget has done, is tried to obviously, well, not try, but to balance the budget, but also to maintain our current service levels. One of the things is we are in a service business. That's just the reality of government. It's a service business. And our demand for our services does not go down, and it hasn't gone down. There aren't less calls for police. There aren't less people going to the library, less people driving our streets. So those demands have not gone down, but our revenues have. And that's a challenge. When you look at your budget, over the last 4 years, our revenues have only gone up by 2%, but our expenses have gone up 24%. That's a challenge. How do you fix that gap, but also continue to provide a high level of service that we take pride in? So the budget addresses that through some revenue increases, modest revenue increases. The budget also addresses, and this you've already approved, the funding for this. The model for it is the public safety building, a huge important investment that council has worked on for a decade. In August, you all approved that funding for that. And so those revenues and and the elimination of 4 positions are all in the general fund budget. The other component is the Transportation Benefit District that you've already heard at a couple meetings ago, but that is also in the budget. You'll hear more tonight, and that is a 0.1% increase in sales tax. One of the things that one of the primary reasons why we are using that, one is for streets, obviously, to maintain our streets. But another one is to balance the budget. That is the reality, is that we have the $4 million deficit, and that general fund funds the streets. There is not a street utility, unlike water and sewer and storm. So it comes entirely out of our general fund, which is police, parks, all our general government services. So the TPD is a component of balancing the budget. Another important component of the Transportation Benefit District is, and just so you know, 0.1% is 10 cents on $100 purchase. Did I get that? I think I got that right. You have the chart in front of you. I don't. So it's a modest increase. That money stays here. That 0.1% does not go to the state of Washington. It doesn't go to the county. It doesn't go anywhere. It stays in Puyallup. Unlike most of our sales tax, where 92% of our sales tax revenue that we collect goes elsewhere, right? So it stays here. Another important component of that is that the funding is dedicated to streets, sidewalks, traffic calming, signals. It can't be used for something else. It is a dedicated funding. And so that's important. And the last thing that you will see in the budget is our first iterative attempt at priority-based budgeting. This is the work that was done on that in this budget is very foundational. You know, if you build a house, you got to have the ground has to be flat, and you got to have a foundation before you can build a house. And so we've really done the foundational work for future budgets relating to priority-based budgeting. I was at a conference with city managers a couple years ago and was speaking to a budget director of a larger city than us who have implemented priority-based budgeting over several cycles. And her advice to me was, hey, if you can at least establish your programs and the costs associated with your programs that first time, you will be leaps and bounds ahead. And so Team Puyallup, our finance director, and Barbara Lopez, Aaron Thompson, and all those folks over there have worked diligently on that and now have defined 167 programs across the city. And that is in your budget document, and then also assigned FTEs and dollars to that. That's a first step. Still got more work to do in future budgets, but that's included in there. So that's kind of just an introduction. I am going to turn it over to Barbara Lopez, who will do a more in-depth analysis to you. I do want to though thank Barbara Lopez and Aaron Thompson, who have done a lot of work in getting this budget ready and getting it to you. I want to thank all of the department directors and the staff that work on this. And I want to thank you all. There's a lot here. A lot for you to consider and some important decisions that you have to make. And that's not easy. And so I just want to thank you for your commitment and your work to that. So I'm going to turn it over to Barbara.
So while she's coming up here, Barbara, please go ahead and proceed. I just want to inform the public, if you're watching this online, is that this looks like a very casual, informal meeting. And in fact, everyone, you can see the council members are eating. We've been given a meal. And part of that is because this is considered a work session where we roll up our sleeves. We go through a lot of the very fine points, and we can end up being here a very long time, and it's 3 days in a row. So with that in mind, it's just not as formal as it would otherwise be. We don't usually have candy and food out here on our dais. And the second thing is to members, council members, if you have questions, I will scan. Just go ahead and indicate to me. I think in the past we have taken our placard. You can do that if you would like. I will try to monitor. And if you have any questions at any time, feel free, and then we'll try and work them in as the conversation progresses. So Barbara, please, good to see you. You have the stage there.
All right. Thank you, Mayor Castema. Good evening, council. I'm here today to kind of give you an overview of the budget, the environment that the budget was created in, and a little bit more about the general fund and some of the specifics that went into that that general budget overall. So the first thing that I wanted to do is kind of give you a refresher. This is very similar to what you heard me say in June. And then even it's very similar to what you heard back in February as far as the economy goes. So the good news is that inflation is actually, it's coming down, but growth is still slow. The interest rates are still higher, although those are starting to come down too. And all of these things played into the economy that we find ourselves in and are budgeting for. So in terms of inflation, the city uses the first half of the year 2024 CPI for Seattle, Tacoma, and Bellevue. That actually came in at 4.2%. Way better than last year's 6 something and the year before that was almost 9, but it's still higher than what it has been. That comes into play when we, with our salaries and benefits or our salaries and our contracts that we have with our bargaining units. So that is a foundational piece of our budget. As you can see from the slide, the US city average is actually only 3.2% for that same time frame. So inflation in this area does actually run higher than the average. For the inflation drivers, most of the goods are actually back to pre-pandemic levels of inflation. It's still the housing, the utilities, the healthcare, and insurance that are still, still a little bit higher with the inflation, but they're working on coming down. Interest rates, they're still high, but the Federal Reserve did reduce last month by 0.5%. We are hopeful that that will actually start to support some additional growth in consumer spending moving forward. Employment, the job market is actually pretty stable. I was reading some things today, and they're talking about how it's actually better than what was expected. The unemployment rate is up a little bit from its low in June of 2023, but all of the experts are talking about this balance between inflation and jobs is actually in a fairly balanced point right now, which is that's a good news item. The hard part is that some of the consumer trends need to kind of come back into a better spot after having that high inflation. A lot of folks needed to use credit cards to actually buy their essentials. They're spending more of their income to pay their debt, that kind of thing. Credit card delinquencies are higher just because of the way that folks had to manage the budgets to be able to survive the higher inflation. A lot of consumers are still a little anxious about the future. While the threat of a recession doesn't seem to be in play nearly as much anymore, they're still a bit not optimistic about their own financial situations and income prospects. So all of this kind of creates it's not a horrible story, but it's not really our best story moving forward. So that was a foundational piece for this particular budget. The other thing that is lingering are the 3+ years of that high inflation and the lasting effects that it has had on our budget. There's 2 primary areas where that happened. Our sales tax revenues. Those are 50% of our general fund resources that go into, all of those services, police, streets, parks, and all of those services. Prior to 2020, those sales tax revenues increased on average 4%. There were some years where it was 6. There's a few years where it was, a little bit less, but it averaged 4%. That growth slowed to 2.2% in 2022. And the trend actually shifted to a reduction in 23, a 3.4% reduction, and we're projecting another reduction from that for 2024. So the 2024 projected revenues in sales tax are $1.7 million less than what we brought in 2022. That's a big chunk of dollars that would have been able to go into our budget to fund all of the services. At the same time that those sales tax revenues are actually going down, just as everyone else gets impacted in their budget with the effects of inflation, so did the city. On our salaries and wages, there's that cumulative impact of higher than normal CPI for 2023, 24, and 2025. Much of that is driven by our bargaining units. And, to be able to have be competitive in the workforce out there as well. So those were higher than normal. Our benefits, we've got increased medical claims costs that we need to cover. We did do an increase in 23, but it's also driving increases in 25 and 26. Our property and liability insurance has gone up astronomically over the last 2 to 3 years, since it's up $2 million since 2022. It's more than doubled. And then the cost of everything that we use to provide services to the community has increased. So everything across the board has gone up. So if we look at our revenues versus expenses and how those revenues and those expenses have changed for the last 4 years, our expenses have gone up 10.8 million, almost 25%, while our revenues have only gone up 1.3 million, or almost 3%. That's a math equation that doesn't work. And it's left us in a difficult spot trying to create a balanced budget and maintain the levels of service that we provide to the community at the moment. So some of the specific factors that went into creating this budget, the general fund, the revenues are consistent with the forecast that I presented to you back in June. And then the utility funds, those revenues are based on the construction cost index published in June. That's 1.5% for 2025, and I'm estimating another 1.5 for 2026, plus the catch-up provisions that were approved in the utility rate study. On the expense side, wages, that CPI of 4.2%, and then I'm estimating 3.3% in 2026. If a collective bargaining agreement is different, then that would end up being a different amount. Again, a medical increase to cover claims costs, 10% in 25 and 3% in 26. Other costs, in the original forecast, I had done more or less kind of a 3% across the board to try to have things keep pace with inflation. As I was building this budget, that didn't really work. It made that deficit a lot more. So in this general fund budget, it's more targeted changes to specific lines with known increases, such as animal control. Those items went up. Our own utility costs for our buildings, those sorts of things. So it wasn't a straight across. It was, okay, which line items do we know that we have to spend the money on, and do a little bit of a targeted approach there. Debt service, we've got official payment schedules that we have to follow, and then capital projects were based on what funding was going to be available and then the priorities of the city. So those are the primary budget factors. The budget process itself, I wanted to point this out because it wasn't our typical budget process that we did this year. I came to you at the retreat and presented a preliminary forecast, which did not look great at all. So based on that and moving forward, that didn't change. There was a conscious decision made that we weren't going to solicit any new budget requests from departments. There wasn't going to be any money available. Why go through that exercise of asking, what else do you need? Because honestly, all of us could use something, but since there was no money available, why spend the time on that? So instead, departments spent the time on creating their program inventory. That was their contribution, their big contribution in this budget cycle. So they started working on that March through August, probably into September a little bit, because there's lots of fine tuning to do. Then, yes.
Excuse me, could you explain what that means, creating the program inventory?
So basically what it is for each department, we took everything that we do So a program could be a service. It's a service that we offer to the community. We call them programs. The inventory is simply, it's a list of all of those things that we do. It's not every single task that we do, but it's buckets of service that goes out. Like in my department, one of the things that we do is we pay our vendors. We pay our employees. And we prepare financial reports for the audit. So those are 3 of our programs. So it was creating that list of those items and then what people and supplies go with that. So that we could figure out, okay, we've got all of these programs. How much do they cost in terms of people and dollars? That was the program inventory.
So is this feeding into the priority-based budgeting?
It will, yes. It's the foundational piece that Steve spoke to a little while ago.
Thank
And
you.
so I'll touch on that a bit too, more towards the end.
Thank you.
But that's what departments did. So then, and departments also like Public Works and
Thank you. I understand not having staff put together the asks for what what they need because we don't have those funds. But how do you know what for with our grant coordinator or things like that, if there are things that they need and could be prioritized in another way, how are you going to determine that?
that was just not done this time around. It was literally a hold the line.
Right, but I'm saying,
type of
I
thing.
understand we don't have the funds to
Right.
pay for it, but if there are other funding, like, I know that the police department has had AWC grants for their DCR, or just the other types of things that there's outside funding available. And so if Jessica doesn't know what, or if this list of what they need wasn't done, are we going to be able to look for the funds that are available?
Yes, we will still be able to do that. Because it's a matter of figuring out what are the police department with the AWC grant and all of that, they had a need. And so they went out and they kind of researched what the available, how they might approach that particular need. So it doesn't preclude us from looking outside to see if there's ways of filling that need. It's the looking inside.
No,
to
I
fill that
understand that,
need.
but I'm going, okay, so if Jessica's time needs to be prioritized on grants, if so-and-so, if we can do this or this and the list doesn't exist, how does she proceed with that?
So most of the grants are capital grants and they did do the exercise with the capital grants.
Okay, but like
With
the
the capital funding.
DCR, that wouldn't qualify, so
So all police would need to do is to reach out to Jessica and say, could you help us research if there's options for this?
okay. Okay,
I'm not sure how to answer that any better for you.
I just still think that the fact, knowing that there are needs and what they are, and if we have opportunities for creative ways to fill the needs, it would be, but I understand.
And I think there have been opportunities during the year, and you've seen them come before you, where there are grants where we, would apply for grants or programs. I think what Barbara was saying here is that our typical budget process is that departments would bring staffing requests and new program requests. And that was something that we did not do. But in terms of if there is a need and there's a grant and a department was aware of that, we would pursue that. It just wouldn't be pursued through an increase in our general fund. It would have to be something we'd have to get a grant for to cover it.
Councilmember Whitting.
I was going to save my questions for a little later, but since we're kind of taking a side thing here, I thought I'd jump in at this point. I needed a little more clarity, Barbara. I can see that this budgeting process has been a challenge. And you've done some things that have been a little extraordinary to make ends meet. You mentioned the way we've addressed inflation and how you've pulled out the part of that you could identify, but obviously everything goes up. And I think normally you would just make some assumptions about what everything was going to go up and build that in. How do you, I'm a little bit of a loss how you're dealing with those unidentified, but going to happen kinds of inflation issues.
The last 3 years was one of those unidentified, but it happened, inflation issues. They always happen to one extent or another. Usually it's not the budget as a whole, it's a line item or two. And, one of the things that we ask departments to do is their budget's their bottom line budget. And sometimes they have to make choices. And because they end up having to spend more in this area, then they end up spending less in another area. That doesn't always work. We've kind of hit a wall where that doesn't really work anymore. And so where we are kind of at the point where something needs to give, and maybe that's another revenue source, which is proposed here. But it could also be that we reduce our levels of service out to the community and we pick what that is and the costs associated with that particular thing that we've decided to reduce that level of service goes away. So, it's difficult to plan for every single option, but we plan for the ones that we know about. And then sometimes we have to absorb the rest and figure it out and maybe do less of another thing to compensate.
Okay, I understand the process. I wish it were otherwise, but thank you.
Yes.
Go ahead.
All right. So, so while the departments were creating their program inventory, we in finance, we took that original forecast and we're fine tuning it to create our foundational budget. Public Works, Parks, they prepared their capital plan based on the funding that was available and the needs that they have on their lists. So you'll see some of that in the budget. And then basically the city manager reviewed all of that and he figured out and we decided what was going to go into this proposed budget. And now it's here with you to get your feedback, your thoughts on that. And because ultimately it is something that you will need to adopt, whatever it ends up looking like. So just really quick before I get to the general fund, I did want to just show a slide that talks about the citywide budget. We have the general fund, but we also have, utilities and debt and all sorts of things. The citywide budget for the biennium is right at $312 million. So roughly, it's not split exactly half and half, but that 312 million. On the expenses side, Public Works, Police, Parks and Recreation are some of our bigger ones, especially Public Works with the utilities and the work that they do there. So this is just a quick look at that. Taxes for the revenues are they're not the highest contributor citywide. It is actually the charges for services. So those are the utility rates and things like that. So about $312 million.
Excuse me, Barbara, on that. So is it fair to say that we're running based on these numbers, a budget deficit of a little less than 1%? Is that fair to say?
Yes. And so you'll notice the difference between the 312 in revenues and the 312.7 in expenses. There are a few funds that have, and we'll get into that more when I show that balancing of the general fund. But there's a couple of funds where they've got fund balance. They've got money in the bank that is being used for some of those expenses. And that is a valid way of balancing the budget.
Understand. Mayor. Councilmember Whitting, please.
Just a question that the human resources line item is a big number. I'm assuming that includes the medical.
Yes. Yes, it does.
Thank you.
So then in terms of staffing, we've got on this slide, I've got the 2024 FTE that's been approved. The 2025 changes is only the reductions that were discussed as part of the public safety building. So our 2024 FTEs right now are 330.35. But for the biennium, we expect that to be 326.25 with those positions that are cut. And I will talk a little bit more about those when I get to the general fund as well. So then to the general fund overview. I always like to start with the budget stability policy because it is kind of the foundation for how we approach building a budget. It is also one of the things that's intended to help us weather storms like the inflation that we've had. But it was just too much too fast to be able to completely cover that. So revenues generally for the general fund are developed at the line item level, meaning property tax, sales tax, electric tax, what kind of service is it? I mean, it's at a very granular level. Generally, we do the lesser of the last 2 full years of known amounts. So that would have been 22 and 23. Sales tax is generally the lesser of that amount inflated by 3% per year. So for example, if 2023 was the lesser amount and we're getting to 25, it would be whatever that 23 amount is times 3%, which is 24, times 3%, which is 25. And I'll talk a little bit more about that, how that didn't really seem prudent for this particular budget. So I'll talk about that here in a minute too. Property tax is estimated as estimated levy amount. Any known tax rate changes, if we do have new revenues, we estimate that conservatively. Then expenses are broken down into 3 categories. Tier 1, which are our core services. Those are all of the operating programs that are funded in the general fund, the library, the parks, the streets, some of us smaller departments as well. Core services are also paying debt if we've got debt. And then there is in the transfer for street maintenance. This is the 1.1%. You'll hear more about that again in the Transportation Benefit District presentation, but that's the 1.1 million that we transfer for streets for the basic repair and maintenance of our streets. Tier 2 are like the capital needs. So annual funding towards replacement of vehicles that are nearing end of life, or computers or other equipment. And then if we've got previously paid debt service, to be able to reallocate that to pay as you go. Street capital and radio replacements are the 2 that we had been doing. But when I talk about balancing the budget, I'll speak more to those as well. And then you're familiar with the tier 3. Whatever's left over after that, if there is anything left over after that, is set aside towards whatever one-time uses that council, deems as appropriate. So that gets us to talking about our general fund and how it's out of balance, essentially that baseline, that what is the minimum that we need to carry forward with the core services at or near our current service level without impacting service levels. So the revenues in our projection, the revenue projections that we presented in June, is very consistent with what ended up in the baseline revenues. And again, our intent was to the minimum expenditures to be able to carry on with what we've already, with the current levels of service. So for 25, I'll just use that one as an example. Those revenues were nearly $58.2 million. But the expenses were 61.6. So we had a deficit there of, 3 million and change. Similar for 2026. This is because 2025 revenues barely increased versus 24, and expenditures had nearly a 4% increase by the time you do the wages and all of that. So it's like our revenues barely go up, but our expenses definitely go up. Some of the primary factors for that is we do rely on sales tax for 50% of our revenues in the general fund, and they have been negatively impacted by the current economic conditions. The other big one is that 3+ years of cumulative across the board inflationary impacts on everything to provide those services.
Barbara, excuse me, Councilmember Dorr, please.
Mr. Mayor, Barbara, I have questions,
Mhm.
but I'm not sure if there's another opportunity because they're not. So when you're talking about vehicles, end of life and replacement.
Go ahead, please.
So I know that one of the things Central Pierce has done is they have looked at, I don't think you're ready. They have looked at all of their vehicles and have determined that refurbishing extends the life and saves dollars. Have we, and I'm not saying every vehicle or everything is going to qualify for that, but is that a strategy that we're employing or have we looked at that?
I
Is-
would leave that to Ken, our Public Works Director, Ken Davies, to speak to.
So like, just for an example, and I'm speaking as far as a fire engine, and so in this example, it's a big one. They found that they could refurbish that and get another 10 years out of that. They clearly had to do something, but it was cheaper and for them to do that. And they've also done that with staff vehicles. So I'm just wondering, have we looked at that type of?
So we can look further into refurbishing, like the way you're describing it. Currently, what we do is when we do refurbish, sometimes we have to refurbish just because a motor will, just quit working or whatever it is. And so if we refurbish it, we make a note of that and that vehicle gets pushed out. So it won't be replaced on its normal time schedule. It might get another 10 years, might get another 5 years, that type of thing. But we do that every year. We take a look at all the vehicles and then see if we can, if they're still in good condition. Excuse me. We don't necessarily replace them.
Okay, so it's vehicle by vehicle, but we haven't, so there, like that one, it was a board or whatever, yeah, I guess it's board. The commissioners voted on changing the policy and that the sustainability and having the long-term, looking at that long-term, that was a strategy they were employing to make their dollars stretch. So we don't have anything like that.
So currently in the policy, we do have a useful life. And let's say that I remembered like a automobile, it's 5 years in the policy, but we right now are extended to 10 years for an automobile. And all of our vehicles, we do that. So we do have a policy that's a little bit, it would replace a lot sooner than what actuality is.
Okay, and so is that a policy established by who?
That is a policy that it's in the finance policies and procedure. And it shows the useful life of vehicles from, 1/2 ton pickups up to 1 ton and then 1 ton and larger, then equipment such as man lifts, patrol vehicles, and then, heavy equipment.
And I certainly, I understand that a police cruiser is going to be different than I'm sorry, I don't know if there's anybody from DPS behind me, but an inspector vehicle. The wear and tear is going to be different. But so ultimately, is that your decision, Steve?
So I think the administrative policy was adopted years ago.
Correct.
And I'd have to look back to see if it was council approved it or if it was just at an administrative level. I don't know, but it is Ken Davies and is it Mark Wells?
Wells.
Yeah, Mark Wells, who each year, so there's a vehicle schedule, as Ken said, but then they look at those vehicles every year and don't necessarily follow the policy per se, and they extend them out longer. We can find the policy and send it to you so you can see
Okay.
the policy.
Thank you. I just
Yeah, more than
looking
happy
for
to do
creative
that.
ways to see if we can.
Well, thank you. Councilmember Whitting.
Yeah, just a comment on that score, well, that's a little bit of a slippery slope you go down there because eventually the cost of maintenance begins to exceed the cost of purchasing a new vehicle. So there are studies of vehicles that identify what the number of operating hours. I dealt with that in my company, and we looked at forklifts, and there was extensive research on how many hours you should keep a forklift in operation before it just didn't make sense to maintain, put the maintenance into it, because the downtime would be too significant and the cost of the repairs would be too significant. So there's got to be a balance there. And it sounds like Ken is working to find that balance and try to do it on a vehicle by vehicle basis. But you know, it may be appropriate to look at some of the published studies on that sort of thing. I'm not sure whether they've got them for police cruisers or not, but it's amazing how much information there is out there in the data universe. Thank you.
And
Well,
so
thank you, both of you.
I just wanted to
Councilmember
say
Dorr.
that they worked, so with Central Pierce, they worked with the manufacturers of the equipment and have determined in coordination with them that was a path that would extend life and reduce expenditures. So I'm not asking that somebody go out and just willy-nilly decide it. I'm wondering if we have looked at something similar. Thank you.
Well, thank you for bringing that idea. Again, any kind of expertise you bring to the table. And I know Councilmember Dorr, you deal with Central Pierce and are very familiar with many of these programs. And then Councilmember Whitting, you run a very successful company. So thank you for that insight. Please proceed.
All right, thank you. So at the end of the day, we did have this out of balance condition. So the options to resolve it are, you know, it's the classic. You either increase revenues, decrease expenditures, use fund balance, or a combination of the above. So we started to take a look at what we could do. So this chart shows how our thought process of taking it from that baseline and trying to get it down to something that was a bit more manageable. So the first thing that we did there were some transfers, tier 2 transfers that we opted to not put in this budget. So street capital is a tier 2 expense. In the past, it's been around $900,000. We opted to not do that transfer. That does actually reduce the funding available for street capital projects. The radio replacements is also a tier 2. So these are the public safety radios where we try to replace a certain amount of them every year. This particular area, there's a fund balance there. And so they will be able to replace some radios next year and the year after, but we're using some of that balance that's accumulated instead. The other two, left one, retiree benefits and fire pensions. These are programs that the city is on the hook for. We are on the hook for providing retiree benefits, medical benefits to left one retirees. And there are certain pre-left one fire pension folks that we are legally required to provide pension payments to. The general fund has typically transferred money to help fund those. Both of those areas have a good fund balance in them, so we can use existing monies that are already in those funds to pay for these two. What I will say is that can't be a permanent approach. At some point, those fund balances are going to run out, and we are still legally on the hook for those. But it could be a strategy. We felt that it could be a strategy for this particular budget biennium. So then that left us with a remaining out of balance of almost 2 million in 2025 and almost 2.5 million in 2026. As Steve mentioned earlier, the only additions in this budget are related to the public safety building. So that was the next piece where we budgeted the lease and then the debt, and then the revenue increases that you all already approved, and those expense reductions, those positions that you had heard about to be able to fund the public safety building. That actually provided a little bit more resources than what was strictly necessary for at least these first 2 years. There's about $465,000 more in funding for the biennium. So that did bring the remaining out of balance down a little bit to 1.7 in 25 and then 2.2 in 26. So roughly around a $1.9 million per year on average.
Excuse me, Barbara.
Yes.
Just so that I can somewhat interpret what you said, are you saying that by filling that gap of the 1.7 and 2.2,
2.2.
sorry, I just got these glasses, that in fact that may not in and of itself, by filling that gap, we still may not come out of here with a sustainable budget?
It's always possible. You never know what the factors are. Once you build a sustainable budget, the economy can derail that. We had a sustainable budget until the last 3 years of really high inflation. So it's a constant attempt at making sure that you're remaining sustainable.
Okay, I'd like council members to noodle that one around. Go ahead, proceed, please.
Yes. Nothing ever stays the same. That is one thing. Change is always constant and you need to be able to be nimble and react to that one. So we were still out of balance by nearly $4 million for the biennium. And we were strategizing different options, what were the cuts? But if we cut, it's like levels of service. And what would that look like? And we talked about the transportation benefit district and the 0.1% sales tax that would be dedicated to streets, so that then some of those monies that the general fund is paying for streets could be repurposed to the other core services. So the transportation benefit district, the proposed 0.1% sales tax, does two things. It creates a funding source that's only for streets, and it frees up money that we're already paying for streets to be able to put it to other programs to balance the budget. With the transportation benefit district, this proposed budget assumes that it wouldn't go into effect until April 1st of next year. There's requirements for notifying the Department of Revenue, and we would not be able to get that done in time for January 1. So that's why you see the difference in the two amounts. A full year is $3 million. It does actually generate more than what's needed to strictly balance this budget. It leaves 525 in 25 and then 755 in 2026. Those amounts could be allocated as one-time funding for streets capital. That's an option. It could be, if you've got other suggestions, it could stay and just accumulate in a fund balance.
Would that be in tier 3 then?
So it wouldn't necessarily be that specific dollars, but yes, it could end up in tier 3.
Okay, thank you.
This particular budget doesn't use any fund balance to actually, not of the general fund proper, to balance this particular budget. Policy for council is to have between 8 and 15%. We've got the 15% and we've been maintaining that 15%, which is slightly less than what our Government Finance Officers Association recommends, but it's close. So it is considered a good fund balance to have. So that was our proposal for balancing that particular budget. So when you put all of this together, the general fund revenues for the biennium would be 1.28 or $128.3 million. That's taking what our baseline revenue projections were, the revenues that you approved as part of the public safety building project, and then the 0.1% sales tax for the transportation benefit district. Under that scenario, taxes are about 81% of the funding for the general fund. And I apologize, there are budget overview references down at the bottom, and those page numbers are wrong. I apologize. I did not make that right. That should have actually been pages 18 through 21. Yes.
Well, no wonder. I was poring over those pages at length.
trying to
Councilmember
figure
Whitting.
out what it was.
He-
Yes.
Mr. Mayor.
Yes. So I apologize for that. And all of the budget overview references in this particular slide deck are incorrect. Again, I apologize.
Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Budget stability fund balance, you say we're not utilizing that at this time, is that correct?
The general fund balance,
Oh.
we are not using that to balance the budget. We are keeping it in reserves.
And how much is in there?
It's about 8.99 million.
And what was the purpose of that? When that was set up many years ago, prior councils, and then I think the prior budget director that was there, set that up. What was the purpose of that?
So best practice is to have money set aside in case things go really, really sideways so that you can, it's a mechanism to be able to weather economic storms. We dealt with that in 2020 with the pandemic. But it's best practice to have what they say is 2 months worth of your expenses set aside in what they call you can call it a rainy day fund, but it's part reserves for something going sideways. It's part insurance policy. And then too, it's part, is there something that comes up that you really have to deal with and you weren't expecting it? So it's a best practice, and that is why it got established.
When's the last time we've used it?
We used it during the pandemic.
How much did we use
I do not recall.
approximately? We didn't drain it.
No, we did not. When the policy was put into place, though, there was only about predates me. When the policy was put into place, it was really intentional because reserves were at only about $900,000. And so, and again, best practice in the industry is at least that 2 months worth, which would be 16%. We're at 15.
Well,
Yes.
that's a 2 months if we have no income coming in at all, which is unlikely typically for city government to have zero income coming in for 2 months. Right.
In theory.
Yeah.
But you never know what
Well,
will
there's no-
happen. And again,
There's no
this is-
historical precedence for that, is there? That there would be zero money coming in for several months at a time in any municipality?
The purpose here is that's just a measure of what it should be. There's no expectation that
It would actually
that we
happen.
would have no revenue, but we might have a 20%, a 10% drop in revenue that lasts for a year.
Yeah. Okay.
And we've seen that. So that's really the intention. That's just a benchmark that's used to
Yeah,
not a reflection of what is expected to happen.
sure. Yeah, so I'd like to get more data on that. When that was set up, how much have we utilized it, and when, and how much have we used over the course of that particular fund, to get us some kind of precedence of when it was used, and maybe set a mirror when it could be used down the road. And then to find out, should it be used in perhaps present or soon to be. So we'll come back to that. Transportation benefit fund or tax increase, or what was that called? Transportation benefit?
Mhm.
What are some of the proposed increases that could be implemented there? Because we haven't implemented that yet, but this is being proposed for consideration. Is that correct? Or has it already been implemented?
It's proposed in this budget, that 0.1% sales tax.
0.1%?
0.1%.
So it's different than the 1/10 of 1% we were talking about earlier then, right?
And actually, we do have,
Yes.
we do have a staff, member Talika will be coming forward and going into that in depth. You can ask questions now of Barbara, but
Oh, I'm just asking if it's separate from the 1/10 of 1%, because I heard that talked about at the very beginning with Steve talking about this is a different tax. Then?
It's the same thing.
The same.
Same thing. Oh, so we're talking about the same thing. Okay, all right. I just want to make sure that we're not talking about two different ones. Okay, yeah, well, that helps me with the budget stability. I'm not convinced that we have enough information to not utilize that now in this perhaps current rainy day, as we might call it. And certainly love to entertain if there's any precedents, how much we've used it since it started, when we used it, so that might provide a mirror on when we might use it again, or perhaps even now.
okay, you can go ahead and do the research on that. Councilmember Dorr, however, maybe we can bring this back tomorrow.
Yes. And I do want to say reserves are one of those things that if you do use them, best practice is to have it be for a specific purpose, a one-time purpose that isn't going to necessarily happen again. Balancing the budget is kind of a slippery slope in my mind for using reserves to balance a budget. So it's,
Okay.
I'm your finance director and I just felt I had to say that out
Well,
loud.
thank you for that. And I certainly respect that, but I guess I'd like to go back to the intent. I'd love to go back and find out when this was proposed, if that in fact was the precedence for when it was used, when it was set up by the prior director, or when council approved it. Was it under those limits or preview that you just discussed? I'd be curious to find out how it was birthed.
Okay.
What was the intention then of possible uses, or was it left wide open?
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Dorr.
Thank you. Couple things. What, Dean, it was right before I came on council and it was a council initiated thing. I don't know if that's helpful, but that's about the time frame. But my question is back to something Barbara said. You said that we used the fund balance during the pandemic. Did I hear that correctly? We used part of the fund balance?
At least initially during the year.
Okay,
We had plus a bunch of other mitigation things as well. That wasn't the only thing that we did. We had a list of potential things that we were going to be doing if it turned out that revenues didn't start coming back. And so we didn't technically have to use it, but we did earmark it that was going to be something that if we had to, we could go there. But we did a bunch of other things first. So I wasn't clear initially in my first comment.
so we didn't actually use, you found other ways
We
instead of
found
using.
other ways.
Okay, so then do we have a policy, if this is a reserve rainy day fund that was established by council, is there a policy about council authorizing using those funds? So South Sound 911, we have a rainy day fund, but it cannot be used without approval of the board.
I think that Barbara had mentioned that the funds are intended for more one-time use, not for a budget that would be sustainable on an ongoing basis.
Right.
And that's therefore, when we use these, we will be in this situation 2 years from now, or less than that. We'll be in the situation, depending on how much of course we use. So I think that, am I correct? That's kind of the protocol that is followed with those funds.
That is, so this originated with the budget stability policy, the reserves between 8 and 15%. It originated with that. I believe it was right after the Great Recession. So 2008, 2009 timeframe. The city didn't have a ton of reserves. They were having to do budget cuts and things like that. And so I believe you're correct that it was a council initiated thing. The policy itself does not talk about the appropriate time and place to use it.
Well,
That the policy just doesn't speak to that, but it speaks about building that fund balance to where it's up to 15%.
and I am supportive of the budget stability policy, and I'm not advocating that we use it to balance the budget, but when it caught my attention when you said that we had used it, because that is a rainy day fund established by council. So I would not like to find out after the fact that it had been utilized and we were unaware.
I misspoke.
No, I know. I understand that you have misspoke, but I'm asking you, is there a policy that prevents that from happening, that ensures that council is the one that authorizes
There
using
is
that?
nothing in current policy right now that speaks well to that. So that might be something that we want to take a look at doing.
However, all budget adjustments come through us.
Yes,
What I was
they
just
do.
gonna say.
So any kind of modification, we have to take a vote on that.
Correct. Yes.
So when those quarterly budget adjustments come, if we ever propose using any of that budget stability, our fund balance, it would be in that quarterly budget adjustment, and we would highlight that. The other thing too is not that we have a very low debt ratio here, as you all know, but this also does factor into your financial stability and your bond rating when they look at your overall budget, the amount of operating capital that you have set aside to ensure, for emergencies. So that's another component. And it really is not intended for ongoing expenses. I would equate it, it's almost kind of like federal funding or ARPA. A lot of cities are in trouble now because they relied on ARPA for operating expenses ongoing. That really is not the intent of a fund balance. It's to get you through a particular time. But if you build any programs or services around it, that's a very, very slippery slope. And I think that's what Barbara was saying earlier.
And it's a very valid point. As we go out to issue bonds for the tenant improvements for the public safety building, we will need to go in front of a rating agency and get a bond rating. And they will look at all of our financials, and reserves is something that they look at to make sure that we're solvent.
And we're best practices, basically.
Yes, and best practice.
Councilmember Gilliam, and then I will go Johnson and then you.
I actually want to shift gears because I was looking at the slides and I just wanted a little bit more clarification on if we were to adopt the transportation benefit district into our budget. I have PowerPoint. I have the PowerPoint on my laptop, so it's a little bit easier for me to stay on top of things. But on slide 15, it says the taxes percent for our revenue would be 81.2%.
Correct.
And I was just wondering, right now we are at 50% sales tax for revenue. And then if we were to adopt the TBD, it would bump us up to 82%.
That's total taxes, property tax, sales tax, the 81.2% are all taxes, not just sales tax.
Okay. So we would still be, I'm trying to wrap my head around this. 50% of tax for a city is sales tax. And then the other taxes all together total 81.2.
When you add all of the other ones to it.
Copy that. Thank you
Yeah.
very much.
You're welcome.
Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The projected deficits that are running are based off of the last roughly 3 years and the economy and the inflation. But I suspect that we have some optimism this is not going to continue to drive this direction. We may stabilize and actually bring in more income again. So this is not something we can anticipate for a long-term budget, right? Right?
So while revenues may come back, once those expenses are at the level that they're at without actually doing conscientious cuts to levels of service, I don't see our expenses coming down. So revenues could go up, which could help some. But again, it's trying to be sustainable moving forward. It's kind of like we've got a new benchmark in expenses to maintain the services that we're currently doing.
I'm optimistic that revenue would go up because revenue has gone down. And so I would think that at some point it could bounce back, which would bring in more budgets to cover
It would.
expenses, right?
It may not be enough, but it might.
But yeah,
You know,
so
time will tell.
theoretically, I'm just saying, even if I'm not proposing that we use this budget stability fund, but even going into it with some optimism that we could utilize it short term, not as a main staple for operation budget, but with the anticipation that perhaps in a couple of years, expenses might come up to fill in, so they wouldn't be reliant upon that for here into perpetuity, might be something to look at. Second thing is going back to this, who was the finance director that retired before he came out? What was his name? I forget his name. He's a character, super
Cliff
nice.
Gregg.
Cliff. I think it'd be really important, staff, to find out, because if council approved this, which of course we did, I think I remember that. I may have been here or pretty green here. It would be important to know the context of how it was presented to us. And maybe he had some mentions that it could be used in times of budget deficits. I don't know that, but I certainly would want to make sure that was, included in that, so that we make sure that we have accurate, understanding of when it was implemented. And then I think there was one more thing. And by the way, I'm not opposed to looking at this, raising taxes of 0.1%. So I'm not proposing that I'm against that, but I really want to understand the context of when he presented this to us, to council, and what were some of the verbiages that were used that could be a rainy day fund that could get us by through a couple of months until the revenue was restored out of that. Because I do remember the 2008 when we were really going through some tough times. I think that's probably what triggered this from Cliff,
is.
wasn't it?
It is
So
to
we
try
learn-
to make sure that that never happened again.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And so for that not to happen again means that you have to pull in it once in a while. So anyway, I just love to know the context on that. It would be helpful. And I'm not against this 0.1%, but I think it's not either, it's not one or the other, but perhaps either or both. Let's see.
Thank you. Councilmember Whitting.
You know, in your budget stability policy, you talk about taking the lower of the last 2 years, which year did we use as a benchmark this time?
It depended on the actual line item. Some line items it was 22, some line items it was 23.
So sales tax,
Sales tax is actually kind of neither in a way, because 24 is less than 23. So even 23 is high. So essentially it's 24, what we expect to receive times 3%.
okay, so I wanted to make that clear, because if we 2024 is 2% behind 2023, so if we were using 2023 plus 3%, then it'd be 5% over 2024. So that'd be a pretty aggressive
Yes.
increase. And given that we've had decreases the last 2 years, you know, obviously the economy is improving, but and people are thinking that we're not going to have a recession, but I would not say that we're out of the woods quite yet. And the other thing about having reserves for capital things is we've got a big capital project on our plate right at the moment. So if depending on the cost of that project, if it came in over budget, we'd want to have some reserves to cover that cost. So I would be reluctant to dive into our reserves very much at this point in time. You know, when the next 2 years, we've got that project underway. The end of 2 years, you know, the ability to see the future without that big uncertainty. I know we have contingencies built into the capital projects, but sometimes contingencies aren't adequate. So it's good to have some reserves. Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead, Barbara.
Okay, so that was the revenues, and so for the expenses, the total expenses for the biennium for the general fund are 127 million. That includes those baseline, that minimum cost to continue with our levels of service, minus those transfers where we're reducing, plus the public safety building project. When you add together the salaries and benefits, they're almost 70% of that. We are a service organization, so most of our investments are in people. So there's the expenses, and this is just another view of those expenses by department. You know, obviously we've got a really awesome police department, and we invest in that. We also invest in Parks and Rec. The public works portion on here, that is just the streets portion. Utilities are in a separate fund. So that's why public works only shows a small piece on here. So that's the high level by departments. So then the property tax levy is the next piece that's on here. So 26 is presented on here only as an estimate. We won't actually be able to do the 26 levy until next year when we do the mid biennium. But for 2025, the preliminary general levy amount would be $11.2 million. So that includes value of new construction and other adjustments that Pierce County provides to us. It includes the 1% increase that's allowable by statute and the $730,000 of bank capacity that was connected with the public safety building project. So all of that went into creating that 11.2 million estimated levy. Based on the assessed valuation from Pierce County, that general levy rate would be just over $1.07 per 1,000 of assessed valuation. The median value home per Pierce County actually went up a little bit. I was surprised. I thought that that might go down a bit. But in their August revaluation report, the median value home here in Puyallup is 525,840. So based on a median value home, the estimated cost of just the city's share of property tax would be $566 under this levy.
So Barbara, just to back up on that, so that's an increase of, let's see, that's $76, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
And much of that is due to the, the use of the bank capacity.
That's the annual increase.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
The next piece is to talk about tier 3 availability. Over the last couple of years, we really haven't earned anything new. The current balance that we have is just over 6.2 million, but you've already set aside 5 million for the jail remodel. So that leaves just over 1.2. At a recent council meeting, what I thought I heard was using 91,000 for the quiet zone planning, which brings the amount left unallocated of $1,130,000. The 25-26 preliminary budget doesn't include any recommended allocations. So that money is available for one-time purposes for council to use as you would see fit for one-time projects.
Yeah, if I could only compliment the council in this regards, that the council has been extremely disciplined about keeping tier 3 funding, keeping it relevant for a budget by having a substantial amount and resisting, the temptation to just spend what we have. And that really paid off when we went for the public safety building. And again, this was done before I arrived, and Councilmember Dorr, you were here, and I just have to applaud prior councils that set up the tier 3, that budget scenario, and then again, we're able to use it for a very worthy cause. So anyway, proceed.
So then the last section that I wanted to talk about is just a bit more about the priority-based budgeting and the work that we did this year and our next steps. So just as kind of a reminder, it's like the whole priority-based budgeting is about figuring out what programs do we provide, what do they cost, and how valued are those programs. So the first iteration of steps 1 and 2 have been completed. City services are now organized into 167 programs across our departments. And in your budget book, there is a programs section where you can see the results of all of that. So they've been organized into programs. Costs have been assigned to it, FTEs assigned to each of those programs. So Steve talked about that as being the foundation for work moving forward. I have to commend all of the departments. This wasn't an easy exercise. It's like grappling and trying to think about, okay, I know what I do, but how do I phrase it as to a service that the public can understand? And how do I get it the right size where it's not huge and includes everything in the kitchen sink? And so I really have to commend them for the work that they did. It wasn't easy. They all embraced it. They all did it. And so it's going to end up being a really great foundation for moving forward. Our next steps in moving forward are to be able to, number one is to be able to overlay, if a program has revenues that it generates, overlaying those revenues onto that program. And then also then allocating programs to the relevant strategic goal or goals. What we found is that we need some more time with being able to assign them to goals because a specific program might touch more than one goal. And it's like, how do we go through that in a really thoughtful way? So that is our next step to do that. And then just my little caveat down at the bottom that, this is a multi-step process. So we're going to be continuing to evolve and expand on this work in all of our future budgets. So then that concludes my presentation. And if there are other questions, I'm happy to answer them.
I don't have a question, but I do want to thank staff and thank you. I know that this is things that are new or not, they're challenging, and I think that this is the right way to go. And I appreciate that you and that you know that we don't expect it. Nobody expected you to have this down by this year. And I can only speak for myself, but I absolutely expect there to be things that we could do better because we're learning.
Mhm.
And so, you know, we have to be prepared to fail at some things in order to become experts, be able to advance that. So I appreciate you, Barbara, and the staff for embracing this.
Councilmember Gilliam.
Thank you, Mayor Castma. Barbara, I just wanted to say thank you. This is very in-depth. And one of the things that came across very clear is you put it together based on base minimum. And I know at some point we will get to put more icing back on the cake, but we have just the cake that we're working to maintain and figure out how to make that dough and bake the cake. So I just wanted to say thank you for being forward and clear in your communication. And hey, this is our suggestions. This was very thorough. I hope I understood it all so that we can work together as a team to figure this out. But thank you very much. And I'm really looking forward to the time when we can add things back onto the budget and make it more robust. So thank you very much.
Okay, with that, we're going to move on to item number 1B, community survey results. City Manager Steve Kirkley, please.
Yes, thank you again. So as I mentioned at the beginning, one of the key components of our management system is the community survey. And so Talika Makaria has been the project coordinator for this. So Talika is going to come up and talk about the survey and the methodology for it. And then I'll come back up and just highlight some results.
Thank you, Steve. Good evening, Mayor Castma, council members. Very excited to be here today to present with Steve the results of the community survey that we did in Puyallup this year. So a quick rundown of the topics that we will cover today. I will start with the purpose of a community survey. Why do cities do these? The methodology and design that we used. And then the city manager will talk at a very high level about results and benchmarks and analysis. And again, we will keep it very high level for this presentation, but if you like granular details, there will be a 300-page report from the survey on our city website. So why do cities do community surveys at a periodic?
Excuse me, I think Councilmember Gilliam, I could tell she would like those 300 pages. You'll get that by tomorrow.
Yes,
Anyway,
it
proceed.
has maps and lots of good information. So why do we do surveys? What is their role? So the first one is very relevant today. One of the characteristics of high-performing organizations is that they do evidence-based decision-making. They use data to make decisions. So community surveys give us an objective assessment of our residents' satisfaction and priorities. We use that evidence, we use that data to then make important decisions about resource allocation, about what needs to improve through strategic planning, budget, and other planning processes in the city. Monitor trends. If we do these periodically over time, we start to see those trends. What are our residents' priorities? Measure government performance. So in the next PowerPoint, you will see that some of the data points from the community survey are KPIs, key performance indicators for our strategic plan. So we use what we get from our community. We use that to measure our own effectiveness and efficiency. And benchmarking. So provides context to our performance and gives us a sense of how we are doing compared to others. So for the 2024 survey, we used the services of ETC Institute. They have been in this space for about 40 years, and in just the last 10 years, they've done community surveys for over 1,000 cities and counties in the United States. Our survey was was a scientifically significant survey, which means that the company sent out surveys to random households within city of Puyallup limits. Now, even though it says random, the company has a very rigorous process to make sure that all households are city of Puyallup resident households, and that the demographics, the aggregate demographics of the households represent the actual demographics of our population. The survey was open for 7 weeks, and we received 458 completed responses. Now, that is a very high level of precision. If you look at that last row, margin of sampling error, what that tells us is that if every resident in Puyallup took this survey, then we are confident that 95% of those responses would match the responses of this survey. And if there is a variation, it would be less than 5%. So that way we know that these are good, precise results, and we can use them confidently. Survey design. So the survey was modeled after our city strategic plan, the council's 4 strategic goals. And as you'll see in the next few slides, there was one section for overall quality of life. So there were about 6-8 questions there. And then we had sections for overall services. So there were 8 overall services in the city, 9 actually. And then for each of those, within each, we had 6 to 8 questions. So combined, there were about 60 individual services or aspects of services that we asked questions about. For each of those, we asked residents, what is your level of satisfaction? And how important is it for city leaders to emphasize on this in the next 2 years? So what you'll see as percentage in the next few slides is positive rating. And when you see the word importance, I want to say this, that for you might see low importance. That does not mean that people said this doesn't matter. What they said is this doesn't need particular emphasis in the next 2 years. And finally, we had benchmarks for 26 areas. So we can see how we are doing compared to a regional average, Northwest regional average, and a national average. So if there are any questions about this section, I'll be glad to answer. Otherwise, city manager will talk about some of our results.
Okay, so don't go far, Talika, because she knows the 350-page document much better than I do. But I am going to go over at a very high level the results. And as Talika had mentioned, these results will be available online. Here is the document, so it is quite lengthy. I don't want to go through each section, but just kind of a high level. So first of all, these are kind of your core questions that you ask in any type of this type of survey. And the thing that I think that is pretty amazing, something that I think all of you and our community as a whole, it's not just the organization, the city of Puyallup, it's also just our community as a whole and the different partners in the community, from the school districts, private and public, our main streets, our chambers of commerce, our employers, but people like to live in Puyallup. And I think I'm preaching to the choir, so to speak, here, and that all 7 of you know that, but 91% of the respondents said that Puyallup is a good or excellent place to live. And when you look at our regional comparison and our national comparison, it's almost double that. Another important component is the place to raise children. As you can see, it's 83%. And then 53% for the Northwest region, and the national average is 61%. So these are some just some really remarkable statistics that I think have show the investment that City Council has made in the services, and the pride in our community. In terms of our city service areas, these are the different components of the core services. And then there's, subgroups under each one of these that we won't go into great detail. But Parks and Recreation, 83% of the respondents said that they are satisfied or very satisfied with our programs and our facilities. This is something I think we know. A city our size, 14 square miles, 43,000 population, the quality and quantity of our parks is impressive. And I think your constituents reflect that in this survey. Also, the quality of our police services, 76% rate that our police are good or excellent, which is far above the regional and even more so above the national average. And then we could go down each one of those, but you see that on all of them, we are at or above the national or regional average. This gets into some of our individual services within the different categories. So just highlighting a few of these. So snow removal on major streets rated high. The week or so of snow that we get, when we do get it, our Public Works Streets Division does a really good job of clearing the streets to the extent they can, and the community recognizes that. And then mowing and trimming along our streets and public areas, that receives high ratings. Now, there are portions of this where we are at or below some of the national and regional averages. The overall feeling of safety and some of our timeliness of information provided by the city out to the public. Those are areas that we need to work on. And so while there's a lot of very good components to the survey, there's also areas that we need to work on. And this is a tool to enable us to do that. This is.
Excuse me, Steve.
Mhm.
Councilmember Dorr, please.
Thank you. Will we be able to see, I'm interested in some of these questions or the responses, but the responses are also indicative of how the question was phrased.
Mhm.
So are you able to help us with like the transportation, your quality of public transportation or whatever? What did we ask them?
Yeah. So the questions, and you will get that as part of, here's the survey entrance. So you were not one of the 458 who got it.
No, I did not.
I did not either. So the questions are because to enable us to benchmark, we want them to be standard that the survey company uses. So they tend to be very generic questions. I could find the specific one on that and read that to you if you'd like. If you give me a minute, I can find it. But they are very broad and generic. So on that one, and you're referring to which one, Councilmember Dora? Was it?
Transportation. It's just, that's just one I'm picking out, but I would like, it would be interesting to know how they were phrased.
Sure. Yeah. So under like city streets, those questions, here they are condition of major streets in Puyallup. And then you have the scale of very satisfied, satisfied, neutral, very dissatisfied, and don't know. Condition of city sidewalks. So it's it's a generic question so that you can benchmark that and use that across the nation and in the region, rather than having a very specific question to say, how are the sidewalks on Wildwood Park Drive or something like that. So that is the reason why you do that. And so then you can also compare the results in future years, because we're going to continue to do these.
Okay. So like with the transportation question, are they asking, is that geared towards how easy it is to navigate the streetlights? Is
Yes.
that the
Mhm.
public transportation, the train and the bus, or what are these questions geared toward things that which we can control? Or we don't control Sound Transit. We don't control Pierce Transit. Though, so I'm just trying to, are they geared towards what we can provide?
Yeah, very good question. So, and you'll see when I get later that we are able to a certain extent dial in on what that is, because that is an area that we need to work on, and I'll go over it, and it will address exactly
you.
what you just
But
asked.
the point of these questions is that they're not what they would call a push poll, where they would say something like, if, we could, I don't know, do something really fantastic, would you agree? None of the questions are like that. They're supposed to be extremely objective. And then they're supposed to be almost identical or so similar you can't tell the difference between the same questions that are asked the other cities. Otherwise, we can't really do an across the board comparison. So these survey companies, I know when they craft that question, they're probably using time tested questions that they have put out to all of those various thousand. I agree. If they wouldn't do that, if it was a push poll, that's not valid.
Yeah,
So-
so like just defining the term transportation is what I want to know. Are they talking about streets? Are they talking about the bus service? Are they talking about so just,
Yeah,
and that's, he said he will agree to it.
we're interested in real, and I've emphasized this, we're interested in real data. I mean, the way people really think, not some optimistic rosy picture or some push poll, but really what people accurately think as possible through a real objective question. Yes. Councilmember Adler.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. If I may, it seems to me that this is a question of definition. So I'll just say that I would like to see the survey questions. But you know, this overview here of the ratings of the overall city services, you know, it does say quality of the transportation system in Puyallup. And so, you know, I don't much want to get into what I do during the day, but I would just say that transportation system makes it sound as if we operate our own system. Transportation itself, independent, I think you could glean and say that that includes roads and sidewalks and all of that infrastructure. But to me, including system is a little surprising. Thank you.
And Talika, feel free if I'm missing anything. But when you look at the questions, and we will provide you with that. Some of the questions in there: ease of walking in Puyallup, ease of travel by car in Puyallup, ease of travel by bicycle in Puyallup, ease of travel by public transportation in Puyallup. Now that is, you know, beyond our scope necessarily. Ease of public parking, progression of traffic signal timing. So that transportation category is kind of a broad category, and then the questions actually narrow it down and they go into more specifics, which I'm going to cover just briefly here in a minute. Did I cover that, Talika?
Yeah, just
Please come up here.
so the previous survey that we did, they used the term mobility. And again, they have to use those same terms that they use in the national survey and with all other resident surveys. Otherwise, they can't give us a benchmark. So transportation system does not refer to public transportation, except that one question, it means connectivity. Connectivity in our city and the ease of mobility within the city. But again, it's transportation system is what ETC uses. And if we ask to change that, they wouldn't be able to provide us a benchmark.
I appreciate that. That helps me, and especially the way it's broken down. That's what I was trying to understand, is how did we phrase these things? So thank you.
Mr. Mayor?
Councilmember Johnson.
Yes, was this taken online through an online email link, or did it come through Facebook? Refresh my memory on how this came through, because I think I recall taking this, but I'm trying to remember how I may have got it.
But most of it was by mail, but go ahead.
Yes.
Speak to
So-
the methodology.
So we did two surveys, two phases rather. The random sample survey, which we were sure that only residents, they got a paper survey, but it did include also a link. So people could use the link and take the survey on the portal if they wanted, or they could use the paper survey. So they had that option. After the 7 weeks, we also opened the survey to anyone in the community who wanted to take it. So that you might have seen on social media or other places. But those results are separate because there we are not sure if those are residents. So those results are separate. We don't mix those with that.
Just for curiosity's sake, were there some consistencies across the board between the general and then the specific?
Yes, very similar. And that is, again, very standard. We saw that the first time as well. Very similar, but we don't mix those results.
Okay, thank you.
So this is an important component of what ETC provides us, and it's the importance versus significant analysis. And basically what this does, what this reflects is it takes the different categories at a broad, but also, certainly a specific level. And it says, what are the areas that the residents have said are most important? Because when you see the survey asks of the areas within, say, we'll just say transportation, what are the 2 areas that are most important that we should focus on in the next 2 years? So that is the importance component of it. And then also you have the satisfaction of it. And so that's the very satisfied, not satisfied. When you take those 2 and you combine them, what ETC says in their survey results when they provide these to the cities is you want to look at areas that are rated as very important, but have lower satisfaction ratings. And so that's what this reflects. All of these areas that you see, we are all above the national the benchmarks. So we're still above the benchmarks for all the satisfaction in these areas. But on some of these components, as you'll see, the importance is incredibly high. So for instance, in the maintenance of city streets and sidewalks, satisfaction is 55%. That is above the benchmark, the national benchmark, but that's low within our satisfaction ratings. As you saw earlier, some of the parks were at 84%, 82%, police at 76%, et cetera. And so those are those higher percentages. So what this table shows you is here are the areas that the survey participants, the residents, have said are areas that are really important, but aren't at the satisfaction levels that they would like them to be at. So hopefully that makes sense when I'm explaining that. And so then they break that down by categories. And so those first 2 you see, very high, maintenance of city streets and sidewalks and the quality of the transportation system in Puyallup. And I'll move into a little bit more detail on that in the findings section here. So just some broad overviews. Puyallup is a very desirable, livable place. I think that, we know that, and the survey statistics show that 91% place to live, place to raise children. Off to the right there, I think this is an important one we didn't touch on earlier, but I think it's worth highlighting. That middle bullet point there, 84% of residents plan to remain in the community for the next 5 years, and 74% would recommend living in Puyallup to someone who asked. And what I can tell you is that in the private sector, they use what's called the Net Promoter Score often if you're in any type of service industry, and that is basically, would your customers recommend your service to somebody else? And when you are above the 60% level, that is considered very good. And so 74% of people living in Puyallup saying, yeah, I would recommend this to someone is a great number. The second component is, and no surprise here, I think we've heard this, and you all have invested in our parks over many years, but our appearance of parks get very high ratings, playground equipment, our residents appreciate that, use them, and value them. The third one, and this is why it was important to talk about that important satisfaction rating, is the streets. This is an area that the residents have said, this is an area, while yes, we're going to rate it higher than the national and regional average benchmarks, but we think you need to pay more attention to it. And so when Councilmember Dora, when you were asking earlier about kind of breaking that down, what does that mean? So if you look down here under the individual service ratings, these are the rankings based on the survey of what the respondents have said you should focus on. One is progression of traffic signal timing. That is something that folks would like us to focus on. That is squarely within the streets. We have an adaptive system along our major corridors, Meridian, 9th, and so that is an area that we can work on. And I talked to Ken Davies about that and looking at how we can recalibrate our adaptive system. The number 2 is the condition of major streets. That is the second most important thing. Third would be ease of public parking. And then last is the accessibility of streets and sidewalks for people with disabilities. So you'll get this entire survey and you can go through it. And if you have any individual questions about that, I'm more than happy to answer those. But when you do see what the company has said is, if there's an area that you should spend time on in the next 2 years, it is your streets. Public safety is a strength and a priority for residents. There are components that we obviously certainly could, that they are saying we could work on. The visibility of police in neighborhoods, as I was talking with Chief Engel this morning about that, for Puyallup, I think, and this gets back to kind of the question, like you ask these general questions, what does that mean? Well, I literally think when people see that question, which is, this is the question, do you see the police visible in your neighborhood? I think part of that is that our police don't just simply park in neighborhoods and just stay there. Our police are very active and they are going out and they are using data and analytics to focus on the areas that actually have the crime. And often, as the chief said, they're often in the neighborhoods when people are asleep. So they may not see them. And the other component of it is a lot of our crime is not in our neighborhoods. A lot of our crime is in our commercial areas. Our violent crime, our crimes against people, very low. Our issues are property crimes, which often occur in your commercial areas. So that's where the police are. So that's just kind of the broad overview of the survey. As Talika had mentioned, this will be available on the website. You all will have a copy of it. If you have any questions, specific questions, more than happy to answer those.
Thank you. Any comments? Councilmember Johnson, then
Yes,
Councilmember
Steve,
DeWart.
Steve is kind of the, lack of a better word, the CEO of the staff and kind of implementing the council's kind of direction. As you're looking at the survey, I would think that this is kind of semi-important for you. Did you find, let's just say from your instinct, we got the data in front of us, but was there a couple that you felt like, hey, I really need to work with our city structure or, improvements that we really need to dial these couple room for improvement? Where did you, or was it all pretty rosy? I mean, I'm just trying to think.
Yeah, no, I think there are certainly areas. One is the signal timing, and I hear that from some of you. I mean, and so that is something that we will need to work on. Another one is getting our information out. We have and part of those questions are in public meetings. We look at the meetings and the attendance at public meetings. It's gone down. Part of that we could talk about pandemic, but part of that is just getting information out to the community, informing them of events or of projects that we're doing. So we certainly can improve on that. Our customer service component, one of the things in there when you saw that data in there, we actually get, and I'm super proud of this, I want to say it is of our staff, the team, in terms of customer service rating. People, our residents rated our customer service very high. Not to say that there aren't areas that we improve on, but when you look at the survey respondents, I think it was about 181 of the respondents actually had to interact with the city for a service or a question, a complaint. And of that, I think it was close to 70% of those folks. Yeah, it was actually, about 70% of those folks said that the response from the city employees was excellent or good. So that's a good component of it. But there are things we need to work on. I mean, this isn't just a rosy picture. There's areas we can focus on, but there's also some things that we're doing really well that we need to continue to do well.
Okay. Yeah, I would just continue to follow up on that. Yeah, I didn't hear really glaring ones in there that needed immediate improvement just based off of your comments, which is fine. I think that's good. We're on a right track. We're going to continue to fine tune that, even get better. I would just offer a response to your comment on more public information and involvement. Again, on my third term, I think Councilor Berdor is finishing her third term. So I think could be some of the veterans left on this one. But sometimes I think that the perception of lack of public involvement at council meetings could be a positive sign. I remember when we had big crowds in here, it's because, some might say the council wasn't doing a very good job and there's contentions there. And so people were coming in and rallying the troops and it was kind of, but I think we kind of, in a sense, progressed as a council and we've been able to handle and address things. So it didn't generate a lot of, public outcry of us and them kind of a mentality. It seems like it's really diminished down. So, and I think perhaps there's some confidence in the people electing the right team, and there's no need to get out there and speak your voice because things are moving forward. And so sometimes quiet means that we're doing a good job perhaps. And so just a thought on that. But I am glad to see the results. And I guess just a comment on some of the ones that really pleased me that made me super duper happy and is that is a place to raise children. And not that everyone has children, but the fact that you have a city that has a culture that they want to raise children is pretty telling. And I'll give a personal example of this that is interesting. We raised all of our children here, 3 of them, and quite frankly, we chose to homeschool our children. So not only were they living in Puyallup, but they were studying in Puyallup and they were playing in Puyallup. Everything was Puyallup, and they didn't leave the city. It was all right here. And what's interesting is our youngest son had kind of, moved on and was living in Pierce County and seemed to be inclined to remain in Tacoma, the rest of his, who knows, adult life. And all of a sudden this thing happened. He got a couple children, a couple daughters. And we found out to a surprise just, a month ago that he ended up, didn't even tell us, but bought a house just down the street from us. And he didn't tell us, but I think it was kind of, I told Deborah, my wife, I said, we must have done something right, because the childhood memories that he experienced here in the Puyallup city, he wanted to duplicate, I think, for his daughters. And so the culture that we provide here, it drew in him, I want my daughters to experience the same things that I experienced in their own unique way. And I think that's not a unique situation. I think we'll find that people want to live here and raise their family here, because not that we're a perfect city, we're always striving to be better, but because I think we're a good city and we have a heritage of being very family friendly and senior friendly and just people friendly, hospitality friendly. So it is a really, not to brag, but really to say that we've got a good thing. And that's why I think sometimes at the council we have contentious debate, is because we really care. And because we really care, we have a culture that people really care about and want to live here. So it's a great mirror and reflection, not of arrogance or any kind of snobness, but just a real humbling gratefulness that, we have a pretty good space here. And we want to not only just keep it that way, but we want to expand that, make it even better so that others can share in the joy that we share, which is not an inclusive. We want to be open to others to join us as they would see fit. So thank you. Appreciate that.
So the first thing Steve and I talk about on a quite frequent basis is those traffic lights. It used to be that when we first did the adaptive signals, it's interesting to me when I get complaints of people down here when I represent District 3. I'm totally fine with that. But it was this crosswalks. People were really upset about the way the crosswalks have worked. But more frequently, and what I experience now, is a difficulty. Where's Ken? He knows exactly which one I'm talking about. They don't make a lot of sense. So I appreciate that. And I appreciate Steve listening to me complain about that on a regular basis. I'm a little bit concerned about the communications. I mean, I know we can always do better, but we added a position to address this. So I would hope we're evaluating the ways in which we're reaching out and making that, communicating with people. And is that the most effective approach? Is there something we can do differently to raise that? And the safety component, or the police in neighborhoods, this could be, I notice them. I really do. And maybe constituents don't, but I'm like, oh, who's that? Or, so my perception might be more, I might be more aware of that than other people, but I have to say I am surprised. And, I've lived here my whole life. I will cut through, I know the back roads and I know how to get somewhere. And I am really surprised at how often I do see police in neighborhoods. But safety is safety is a relative concept. As council knows, I had an incident that kind of shook my feeling of safety. And I am more in tune or aware. And then you hear things on the news, and it might not be here, but I think that sometimes that national or regional perception affects how we feel. I don't know that it's necessarily a reflection on the service that we are providing. So I just wanted to highlight that. And that what would be interesting to me is, as this is not the first one, I'd like to see these numbers compared and contrast each year. Are we getting better? Have we dipped? So how are we doing? How can we measure this, and where we can consistently improve, or are we dropping some areas? So that would be helpful to me. Thank you.
And that will be important to continue to do this. This is something new that we've only done the one before in the 150, how long has the city been around? Over 100 years. So this is something new that we need to continue to do, so then we can start to see that benchmarking and that comparison.
But I'm still interested I'd like to see these same categories from last year to see have we addressed them, or are they going up or down? So that would be helpful. Thank you.
Correct. And that we use the same firm last time?
Oh,
So that might be a little difficult
yeah.
to do, but I really think that's a great idea.
Yeah, it is. And in part, the reason why we did not use that previous firm was in part a customer service issue, ironically. But also they were not able to dial in on district level surveys, and to ensure that we had results from across all districts. So it could become very weighted by if one particular area really was involved in a survey. This one is dialed in, so we can confidently come to you and say this represents the city as a whole. So that's why we changed.
Thank you. Councilmember Gilliam.
Thank you, Mayor Castema. Man, I just agree with my colleagues. All great comments so far. I'm just reflecting back on our budget conversation just a second ago, and then I'm looking at our customer satisfaction with our residents. And with all four top 1, 2, 3, 4, all related to basically streets in some form or fashion, the signal lights, the condition of major streets, ease of public parking, maybe not so much, accessibility of streets and sidewalks for people with disabilities. I'm really very interested in this transportation benefit district concept, because if we're looking at a $4.4 million deficit in our budget, and this 0.1% for sales tax is going to help meet the needs of our current residents and take care of all the transient traffic coming through our city, I'm more inclined to pay attention to this concept. So I just wanted to make a comment on that. Thank you.
Councilmember Whitting.
One place where we interface with the public, and I don't really see it reflected in this survey, and I'm wondering if I'm missing it or whether or not we just didn't cover it, but that's the permitting department. Those may not be necessarily Puyallup residents, but they do business here, and we certainly want to be able to provide quick service to them. And I know we've had some problems in this area historically, and I feel like we're getting better, but I don't see that in the data. Am I missing it, or is that another area that we might be able to include in the future?
No, so we do that separately. We actually do that through Qualtrics, and we do that at a department level. So every quarter, is it every quarter that we get the Qualtrics, or every month? Sorry, every month. So we send out satisfaction surveys at 4 stages within the development process. So when they first come in, midpoint, when they close out, and what is the
permit is submitted and when it is finally closed. So it's a milestone survey. So they get that survey throughout the process.
So we do that through Qualtrics. That is specifically for DPS. These surveys are the broader level, because a lot of the permitting customers may not be city residents. They may be businesses, or may not even live in the city. So we do that as a separate data point.
Yeah, I was forgetting about that process. It'd be really neat to get a summary of that.
Sure.
Quarterly. I don't, the activity level there isn't great, but you know, they're, you know, getting it on a quarterly or maybe a semi-annual basis would be great.
That
Deputy Mayor King.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Steve, thank you so much for this information, and Talika and Barbara for your presentations as well previously. Just a quick question regarding the kind of going backwards a little bit, because I didn't think about this until one of my colleagues talked about traffic lights and all of those things. So I apologize, but I'm going to go straight to the man himself. On this 1/10 of 1% that we had previously talked about on the street funding, will that go towards streetlights?
that our streetlights are part of our transportation system, and yes, it could be used for that. So that's one thing I think sometimes residents don't realize, is that it's not just streets, it's also crosswalks, it's also traffic calming, and it is streetlights. And streetlights are very expensive to operate, as we know. So yes.
Good to know. Good to know. Thank you for that. Yeah, I think I'll just leave it there for now, and appreciate everyone here tonight and all the information that has been gathered. Thank you.
Councilmember Johnson first, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I want to go back to Councilmember Whitting's comments on the permits. That's a separate survey, which I recall you, Steve, you mentioning that. And I don't know if the council's ever been briefed on that, an official briefing to just kind of keep up to speed on the data on that. I'd like to get a briefing on that, whatever that is. So I want to reiterate that, but I do want to touch on that survey. I do think we could get some valuable information, but I've spoken with several developers who have recently gone through, let's say in the last, year or less, several, and there is a real concern for fear of retribution to give an honest feedback, especially when you're talking about, early on, in partial stream, and listen, they don't want to associate their name. So are these anonymous, truly anonymous? Or is there concern if they're very objective and just sharing their perspective, even if let's just say they're wrong, but still they're objective? Is there fear? Because I've had several tell me, hey, Dean, we're frustrated with X, Y, and Z. And maybe it's their own fault. I'm not throwing staff under the bus by any means, but they're just frustrated from their perspective. It's perhaps not going like it should. I've got too much money tied up here. I'm just going to put my head down, kiss up, get the job done, and move my business forward.
Well, I have a question. Are they third party administered then?
Qualtrics does that.
Okay,
for
so it
us.
is a third party, and I assume there's a confidentiality.
It's not. So there is an email so that we can respond back to them. So it is not confidential. It's not.
Well, maybe we should have a presentation on that and discuss ways that if that is an area of concern, that we'll explore whether it can be confidential, and that if a person wishes to have a response specifically to their concern, they can opt to do that. I'm just saying opt in as opposed to.
And let me just state for my own personal, I don't think that there's any glaring staff issues or impropriety. I'm not stating that.
Right.
It's just that from their perspective, sometimes they feel if I really am able to speak frankly, it might hinder or taint my future projects here. And from a big scope, it's just not worth risking. I'd just soon kind of keep my head low, get it done, be frustrated and let the steam out over here. But I don't want to bring reform because it might affect my business.
It's on the agenda already.
Yeah.
I'm being facetious, but yes, we'll do this.
Yeah. And then I want to share a personal example on this. Again, I recently had a chance to take an employer sample. I didn't take it. They assured me it was anonymous, but how do I know? And so I didn't take it, even though I wanted to give some feedback, because I was wondering, is my job at jeopardy? And so there's just, again, please understand, I'm just sharing feedback, and I'm not in any way imputing staff of being any major problem. But I do know it's super important that we find a way to objectively look for opportunities for improvement without assuming guilt on even city staff or trying to just get folks not to speak up. So there's got to be a way. But anyway, I just want to touch on it. Thanks, Councilmember Whitting, for doing that. And for the record, and I will state this, in the past, I would say probably 4 years, Puyallup has made huge improvements in our permit department and staffing and all kinds of great improvements. So I want to make sure it's crystal clear from my perspective and many others who love the progress that Puyallup is doing. So I don't want to in any way reflect anything short of that. I just think there's opportunities to become even more excellent. And how can we find ways to do that and really bring out the best in everybody? So I hope that was clear.
Thank you, Councilmember Dorr.
I think that Councilmember Adler was first.
Oh, Councilmember Adler, I apologize.
Thank you. I'll be quick. Appreciate all the staff time and the commitment that was made to ensure that this survey was so thorough and the presentation was put together to help us really understand what our constituents think. Certainly I am, well, let me say, I would like to see the results related to sharing of information from the city, our website, use of social media, better use of social media. I hope to see that as a priority into the new year and into the future. I appreciate the way in which the police department utilizes social media. And I think time and time again, law enforcement across our area, but in particular PPD, demonstrates the way that social media can be very powerful. I mean, certainly we just had an individual that was missing, and thanks to social media, that awareness so heightened, which sounds like there was a positive solution or result rather of all of that information getting into the ether and into folks' hands. So I just want to say that I think that there's a lot of opportunity for the city to increase and to better our communication of all mediums, but in particular, social media and our website and other modes. And then I might be jumping the gun here, but I'm just going to say, appreciate this, like the data. What are we going to do about it? And when is that a presentation that's coming forward is, okay, now we're going to take this results and how we're going to implement them? That's all. Thanks.
So I think one of them, quite frankly, is the Transportation Benefit District. I will tell you that was something that we had considered. And then once we saw these results, that being the number one issue that was rated, it does line up with that particular component. Other components of it, yes, we can, you don't turn things on a dime. There's a lot, as you'll see in the entire report, there are several different categories. And so what we're going to try to do is focus on the ones, the higher, not the lower hanging fruit necessarily, but the higher ones, and try to work on those incrementally. This is our second survey that we've done, and we're learning. We're not perfect at it. And so this is a good opportunity. And so more than happy to come back and give you, we will only, we do these surveys we did one in 2021. So we would likely do one again in 2026 is when we do one again. And then we can start to compare those benchmarkings and then our own data too, to see how we're doing within those areas.
Thanks. I would appreciate a quarterly update on how this data is being used and how that has influenced the goals of staff and the council goals, which is why, I thought about whether or not I should ask the question of what are you going to do, because I know the next presentation is about the strategic plan. So, I don't what I fear and what I struggle with in other situations that I've been in with surveys and the results is, okay, you get a presentation. Thank you very much. We'll try better. See you next time. And there was a lot of time and energy put into this, and certainly investment. And so I just want to make sure that this doesn't get shelved, right? I trust that that is not the case and will not be the case, but I do think that it will be valuable for council to receive periodic updates into the next year. Thanks.
Thank you. Councilmember Dorr.
Thank you. Okay, so the more that my colleagues talk, the more Steve, you were getting off with one. Now I have three. First off, I would appreciate if you would please resend the 2021 survey to council. If we can't compare them, at least we can read them and understand the concepts. On Dean's point, as far as I can understand and appreciate what he's saying, as far as people being concerned about filling out a survey, is it possible that it can be anonymous and we can specifically state on there, would you like the, development services director to contact you or the city manager to contact you? If so, please provide your contact information. So then you get honest feedback, but also accomplish what you're saying as far as, being able to follow up with them. So I don't know if that's, I think that that's a solution to address both concerns. And then the adaptive signals were implemented when I was on council. I don't recall when. And so what is the solution there? Is it because leading back to, tying into the TID? So does that mean we would change, is it that they just need to be adjusted? Does that mean that we have to remove them and do new ones?
So I'm going to, try to talk about it. Ken could talk about it more, even in more depth, but some of this too is some of the signals that aren't even on the adaptive system. So that is something that we would have to work on that aren't part of. So it's some of the side streets, but we can Ken and I were talking about this yesterday. We can go into the base data that the adaptive signal works from and recalibrate some of those traffic flows, because part of the adaptive system, you put in the kind of the basic level, your core transportation patterns that you have, and those can be recalibrated because there may be more volume on the streets now. And so Ken and I were talking about this yesterday and going in and just looking at the underlying data that feeds the adaptive, because it's not just the adaptive does read when cars, are at the stoplight. Waiting, it does read that, but it's also based on your traffic patterns. So it's not just reading what's in front of you, but also based on your historical traffic patterns. And so that's something that we're going to go and look at, see if we can update that, because that has changed over the past year. And there's other little things, like, for instance, I know one area that we've had an issue with, and I look at the deputy mayor and Councilmember Johnson, because they've experienced it, is little things like the cameras are picking up a vehicle that is parked there and they think it's waiting for a stoplight and it's not, recalibrating dates, and it's a computer system. So there are things that we can do on the adaptive corridors.
So that is something we can do whether or not the council approves TID. That is something that the staff has the capability to do. That
we can do to a certain extent. Yes, absolutely. Behind the scenes. Yes.
Okay. So, and I'm not, what's the one that can turn her head around? Thank you. I just am curious as to when did we do the adaptive signals? When did we?
So the first corridor, I believe that was in the 2010s, which was Meridian.
Okay, so that was.
So yeah, and exactly the year, it could have been 2014, somewhere in there.
Okay, that was when I came on. That makes sense, because it was downtown, and then, like I said, people were upset about the crosswalks big time when that happened. So I'm just wondering how long. So we've had 10 years to look at. Have we updated it in 10 years?
So we try to optimize it as much as possible, but in this last year we have not. So we get a hold of Rhythm Engineering, and Brody is his name. He can remote in. He's back east. He remotes in. He'll look at the signal timings. He'll make sure, as Steve had said, that The cameras are incorrectly because they could drift, just from the heat, from summer to winter, and then they could go out of phase. And so he'll look at items like that. He'll look at, it does take counts every single day. And so he'll look at what the counts are looking like. And so he can optimize based on that. Additionally, that would cost us money. So we don't have to use rhythm engineering to do that. We can also do it in-house. Brian Roberts is skilled at it. There's additional, folks that also have skill at looking at those items.
Okay, so then, Steve, when you said that that some of these are signals that are not adaptive, did they identify the signals in the survey? So then how do we know that?
Well, I think the assumption, that's an assumption on my part. That's an assumption. I mean, because we have signals that aren't adaptive. We have how many signals in the city?
There's 63 signals.
63 signals. And how many are those on adaptive? Do you know by any chance?
Off the top of
Yeah,
my head.
not all 63.
No.
So,
Okay, thank you.
Okay, let's go ahead and conclude this part. I just want to ask you a couple questions. First of all, can we get best in class on all of these from the person who conducts the survey? In other words, I'd be very interested to see who the best in that particular category is. In other words, 90.4% in customer satisfaction level just seems to me to be off the charts. But I would be very interested to see if other communities do better than that. And in all of those categories, because you want to benchmark yourself against averages, but then you want to go against best of class. Does that make sense?
yeah, no,
Okay.
I'm sure that we'll find out from ETC what they can provide us.
Okay, just
if they can-
curious on that one.
Yep.
Also, my father always taught me that pride cometh before a fall. So I've always grown up that if I ever feel prideful, to put a check on that, because you better wait, because something bad can happen. So you just have to remain and have that humility, as Councilmember Johnson talked about. But I have to tell you, everyone, that having 90.4% satisfaction rate, if we could be proud just for a second, we should be very proud of that. That is tremendously significant. I have never heard of numbers that high. I can tell you that you go to cities like Bellevue and you walk in their city hall, and off to the side, they have a scorecard where they keep track of that item, such as customer satisfaction, people, their opinion of living there, how they would refer Bellevue to other people. And it's not as high as it is here. I mean, I am just extremely pleased by that. So I will be done being proud here. And just say that wherever we're at, we're about excellence. So whatever number we're at, we're about getting better. And that's what excellence is being the best you possibly can. And we will just strive to do that process of continuous improvement. And through that, we will become better, and we will achieve that excellence that we are capable of doing. So with that, I'm going to take a very short break. Is that okay?
Just a closing comment to tie up that. If you don't mind.
Certainly, Councilmember Johnson.
Yeah.
Please.
Mayor, yeah. In follow-up to the conclusion of this topic, it did take a team to kind of pull this together, but I want to really highlight and honor Mayor Castema. I remember right after you first got elected, you were kind of the lead champion to provide performance metrics for staff to abide by, and the Spaldrich certification. That was your leadership that brought this to the forefront, which triggered the progress that we're doing. Now, council certainly bought into that, but you were the leader in that. And then I also want to, from my recollection, and I also want to really highlight and state the obvious, that Steve, our city manager, caught on and grabbed that, took the ball and ran with it. And he, of course, implemented that through his staff and some of the directors, Talika and all these other folks, who just took it and took the ball. So really, it's a team effort. But really, Mayor, you really did bring this forward, because I think maybe council was working on it in some form or fashion, but you actually brought articulation and standards and a goal. And I think we're seeing the fruit of that. So thanks to you, and thanks to Steve and staff and to council for supporting this, because it was really a team effort. So thank you.
Thank you. So let's go ahead and take a break until 9 o'clock, and just go ahead and stretch our legs. Okay. So 9 o'clock, the gavel will start.
Do you like candy? Do you like candy? Do you like Reese's? Okay, here's an original. This is a special. Here's a special edition. So I'll get to know. I feel about that the same way I feel about dark pepper, that's a love. And then my comment to is there's. It's my favorite and that is, but I think that's exactly how I can. The ones in yeah. Did not.
Again, this is the city council budget session for October 8th. And this is a session where we are going over the general fund and all the budget implications. And we have discussed the community survey results. And now we would like to go into, on the agenda, item 1C, and that is the city strategic plan. We'd like to have Talika Makaharia come forward, please, and she will go over that.
Hello again and again.
There you go.
Yeah. Yes. Tulika Makare, Performance Management Analyst. So as you all probably know, our current city strategic plan was 23-24. So it's time for an update. And what I have before you is a very early draft of updated initiatives and performance metrics. And I invite and welcome all your feedback, suggestions to make it better. And once we have that, I'll refine it, bring it back to you until you are ready to adopt it. So it's been a while since we had one of these, and we have a couple of new council members. So I'll start with a very high level overview of the strategic planning process and the structure that we use here in Puyallup, because it can be done in different ways. And then we'll go to the goals, outcomes, and initiatives. So in Puyallup, we always start with our community. So every time we've done a strategic plan, this is our second one, and we are going to update and make a third one. Every time we've done that, we've asked our community, what is it that you value? What are your priorities? Based on that, we put together a draft and bring it to council. In the past, we've sometimes done it one-on-one, but also the council as a whole. And we come not only for feedback on initiatives, but also on the big stuff that is determined by council, the vision, the general priority areas. Do they still ring true? Do we need to update any of that? So all of that feedback is very valuable. Once we have that, and again, incorporate your feedback, refine it, council adopts it, then it goes to staff, because some of the initiatives that you see in here come from staff. They come from those departmental strategic plans. So it goes back to staff, and staff then does action planning and implements the strategic plan. The plan structure. We begin with who we are, what is our purpose, why do we exist, our values and mission. Then the vision. What do we want to become? This was established by the council in 2020. Then we come to the goals. These are 4 overarching goals, very broad, general. And again, each of this was a priority area determined by the council. And then within that, we have measures of success. How do we know if you're making any progress or not? KPIs. After the goals, the next, we kind of break it down into outcomes because goals are broad, so outcomes are small, more measurable. And then finally, initiatives. These are those actions, those projects that staff works on so that we can move closer to the outcomes and the goals. So one thing about our plan is that it is long-term because there is vision, there are the big goals, but it is also operational. You will see many strategic plans that kind of stop at high level, but we wanted a plan that is usable, that is easy to understand, that people can actually use, that we can measure. So our plan is both high level, but also very operational. So vision, a friendly, active, safe community with a strong economy that celebrates its heritage and unique community character. Again, this was established by Council in 2020. Our mission is to protect and enhance our community's quality of life, safety, economic vitality, and sustainability through fiscally responsible, high-quality public services. These are the values that Steve was referring to earlier. So staff worked on these for 18 months, and every staff member had the opportunity to contribute to these. And we have the compass in the middle because our values are our compass. And what is notable here is that it's not just the 4 values, but also what you see the text is a description of very practical ways we can live these values, use these values in our day-to-day interactions with each other, with our customers, with our community. And at the retreat this year, Council gave this your stamp of approval. So now these are our organization values. And that is our first goal, vibrant economy. I promise I will not read everything on this slide deck, but I do want to read our goal statement. That is important. So what that says is, what does vibrant economy mean to us, mean to you? Puyallup's healthy economy and business-friendly culture attracts investments and supports diverse businesses of all sizes. The city continuously improves processes that impact our local business and invests in infrastructure that is attractive to economic development. Puyallup is a vibrant regional destination for arts, recreation, and entertainment. And then you have performance measures. I do want to point out that this time we've tried to create more robust performance metrics. We haven't had these in the past. So we have review cycles, permit approval time for different kinds of permits. We have resident satisfaction. So there was that question about how we would use the survey results. So that is one way we use some of those questions as KPIs for each of our goals. Net promoter score, and that is from Qualtrics, net promoter score for our services, which by the way is very high. Now on this slide, each of those various shades of orange boxes that you see are the outcomes. They don't change, they can if you want to, but typically we don't make too many changes there. And then underneath in the gray box, the initiatives, those are the projects. And working on those helps bring us closer to our outcome, which helps bring us closer to our goals. So again, I won't read all of those. The first outcome is about enhancing DPS services. And one of the initiatives there is to implement an expedited permitting option. The second one is make infrastructure improvements that attract economic development. We have several revitalization projects, festival streets, signage. The city provides support for creation, retention, growth of business. And this is a new one that DPS will be working on for businesses that need a separate process for site visits. And the fourth outcome is Puyallup is a destination for experiences. And there again, we have the downtown wayfinding and furnishings projects. The second goal, safe community. So again, I want to read the goal statement. Puyallup is a safe city to live, work, and play. The city's police department strives to reduce crime and the fear of crime through its forward-thinking policing strategies, technology, and community partnerships, and highly trained workforce. Puyallup is a resilient community that is well prepared to prevent, respond to, and recover from hazards and disasters. And again, we have some performance metrics for that goal. Blue boxes are all the outcomes. First is operational and administrative efficiencies. And in addition to the police facility, new police facility, we have the police department is working on a master training program for its staff. Resilient community, that is the CERT program that our emergency management is working on. That third outcome, that is a new one. That is in response to what we heard in the community survey. We heard that one of the areas that was a little bit lower rating for a police was perception of safety. So that outcome is the city employs best practice policing strategies that promote public safety and increase the perception of safety. And one of the first initiative in there is also from the community survey, increase police officers' visibility throughout the city through foot patrol, bike patrol, electric bikes. And this is something that the police department also has in their own strategic plan. So that issue about visibility, we actually heard that when we did the focus groups before the before the police strategic plan. So that is something that they have incorporated in there as well. And the last one is reliable infrastructure and services. So this is a new one that Public Works is working on, a Safe Streets and Roads for All action plan. The third goal is healthy and livable community. Puyallup provides a high-quality community environment with housing options for all, access to a variety of parks and open spaces, recreational opportunities, and ease of getting around town. The city proactively enhances and protects its natural environment and provides a support network to those in need. So several of these performance metrics here are new. So number of days to issue a special event permit, satisfaction with maintenance of streets, rate of participation in various recreation programs. And this one has 5 outcomes. Access to quality housing, transportation infrastructure networks and connectivity. Again, something that we heard in the customers in our community survey. And for that, we have the Puyallup Moves Downtown Destination Planning Project that staff is working on to encourage the use of bike routes. City prioritizes the stewardship and sustainability of natural resources. One of the areas there is updating the critical areas ordinance. The fourth outcome is city offers exceptional services for recreation and active living. So we're working on several trails programs, and I know Parks is planning to launch a special summer activity next summer for people of all ages. And the city works to address quality of life concerns and human service needs in the community. And both of those are actually really good. Parks is working with Pierce County to provide, are integrated with the city's processes and practices at every level of the organization. Again, lots of new performance metrics there. Newsletter, open rate, click-through rate, resident satisfaction with communication, with customer service, net promoter score for our civics academy. And again, this one has 5 outcomes. The city is remains fiscally sustainable in the long run. So we have priority-based budgeting, also looking to explore and update some of the fees. Workforce is qualified. We have a new employee performance management system that we haven't launched yet. So we'll be launching, managing that, some trainings. The third outcome is stronger community connections through customer service information sharing. And that is a very cool one. It's, we've heard often that one of the frustrations that people experience on our website is using the search feature. It does not provide the right kind of results of what they're looking for. So this is a new AI tool that will really elevate that experience address the issue of search. And the next one is city facilities, workspace, and technology systems. So several in there. There is a new enterprise asset management system that Parks plans to be using, automation of all city records using our Laserfish records module. And the last one is create a high-performance organization through performance management and analytics. And that is actually the city strategic plan itself. So for the first time, we've identified a more robust set of performance metrics to kind of develop those, collect data, report those. So that is 37 initiatives and over 4 goals. And that is all I have today, but I welcome any feedback that you have.
Any questions? I may have some specific things, but I'll get back with you on those. And kind of drill down on some of those strategic initiatives and see how broad they are. But thank you for bringing them forward. Councilmember Adler.
Thank you. Thank you, Talika. So I just want to be clear in my understanding. So the community survey findings that we just went over, is that part of what you highlighted on your second slide? Does the results of that survey fall under community input that was used? Those results, were they used to develop these goals and initiatives, et cetera?
So we did. For a couple of them, we actually added a new outcome based on what we heard. So we've heard that perception of safety is an issue, visibility is an issue. So I spoke with the chief and we decided to add an outcome to that. So
Okay.
yeah. Yes.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, thank you very much, Talika. Now,
Thank you.
are you up next? You may not want to go very far because we're going to be talking about the Transportation Benefit District. Oh, Steve, okay.
Put on there, Talika. Sorry, Mayor, you were reading correctly. So Talika is going to start out the presentation, and then we have a team effort on the Transportation Benefit District presentation that was done a couple weeks ago, and we've added a little bit more information to it. So Talika will start with just a refresher for those who weren't at that presentation on what a Transportation Benefit District is. And then Barbara will go over the finances of it, the budget around it. And then Ken and Scott Hill, and I think Drew, is it, or just Ken, sorry. Just Ken will talk about some of the street funding and what that would be used for. So we'll start with Talika.
Hello again. And Steve took care of the agenda page. So Public Works Director, Finance Director, and I will talk quickly about these 3 topics in the agenda. And I will start with the first one. What is a Transportation Benefit District? So a TBD is an independent taxing district that may be created by a city or a county expressly for the purpose of either acquiring, constructing, or improving transportation-related facilities. It may, however, also be used for day-to-day maintenance and operations. The most TBDs usually share the same boundaries as the establishing city, and they're governed by the members of the city. So essentially the city council would also be the governing board for the TBD. There are 2 main ways that TBDs are typically funded: sales tax and vehicle license fees. The option that staff is recommending is that 0.1% sales tax, which can be implemented by a vote of the governing body of the council, and that equates to $1 on $1,000 spending. This is a 10-year tax. At the end of 10 years, council may either renew it by a vote or end it. Vehicle license fees can be up to $40 over a period of 2 years, and then a higher amount by voter approval. So this is something you did see in the community survey, but I wanted to bring it back. And this is a great example of how we use our community survey results. And it's relevant to this conversation, so I wanted to highlight this. So the two bar graphs that you see on the top, all of those are individual questions that we asked within city streets and transportation. The left shows satisfaction. So you see snow removal in major streets is very high, but condition of city sidewalks, quite low. On the right is what is important, what should we emphasize on? So again, what was low in the satisfaction is high in the importance, condition of major streets. So when there is a formula that the company uses, when they do that, they come up with a rating system. So maintenance of city streets and sidewalks was ranked the #1 item that they recommend the city pays attention to. Highest opportunity for increasing satisfaction is by paying attention to maintenance of city streets and sidewalks. And the second is quality of the transportation system in Puyallup. If the council should decide to move forward with the process, this is what the timeline will look like. Between one public hearing and an ordinance, we can have the district formed by mid-November, and then another ordinance to fund the district. So the process will be completed before the end of the year. And now I invite Barbara to talk about the significance.
Hello again. So the significance of this for the budget is it is a budget balancing mechanism as well. But first, the 0.1% sales tax, it would be the reason why we chose this instead of the car tabs is because it's broader based than those vehicle license fees. The vehicle license fees would have just been for businesses and residents who own vehicles within the city limits. So this is a broader base with the sales tax. It better aligns with the users of our street infrastructure. So these people are coming into the city to buy something, and so presumably they're driving on our streets to get here. So that is one large reason why we are proposing the 1/10 of 1% sales tax, or I tend to call it the 0.1% sales tax. The other reason is that the car tab fees would raise less than $1 million. My best estimates are around $750,000, $800,000 at this point. And while it would be helpful, it doesn't help in the long run. And then it puts the entire burden on Puyallup residents. So the 1/10 of 1% sales tax it equates to $1 on $1,000 purchase. If this does get adopted, it does require 75 days notice to the Department of Revenue before we can actually enact that. And we can only start it on January 1st, April 1st, or July 1st. So October 17th would be our deadline for January 1st. And clearly that's next week. And clearly that wouldn't work at all. So should you decide to go down this road, we would be expecting to notify DOR for an April 1st implementation date. Again, the estimated annual revenues are $3 million. And the intent is to provide funding for a portion of those street costs that the general fund currently pays for, so that then those dollars can be freed up to other core services. So on the right-hand side, it's a recap from the budget overview, in that a reminder that we were out of balance. We are removing some normal transfers, like for street capital, radio replacement, left one, and fire pension, to help balance that. Then the effects of the public safety building project. So the funding sources exceed the expected cost by a nominal amount. And then it's the 0.1% is basically filling that gap in our budget. So again, the remaining amount is about $500,000 the first year and about $750,000 the second year. You could decide to allocate it as one-time street capital projects, or it could end up in your tier 3 monies and you hold on to it and don't allocate it right away and allocate it in the future. Just as kind of a recap of, okay, what street costs does the general fund pay for? This is the same slide as was in our presentation a couple of weeks ago. But the forecast for 2025 calls for $3.5 million of street operations. Street operations is the staff that goes out and maintains the streets, maintains the signals, fills the potholes, picks up the garbage, does all of those things that our street department does. So that's the staffing and the materials they need to, prep for those snowstorms that don't come very often, all of those things. Then the other piece in the budget is the 1.1 million transfer for street repair and maintenance. That is more of the materials side of the house when it comes to chip sealing and all sorts of other things that I believe that Ken is going to be talking about in a few moments. But right now, the general fund would be paying for about 4.6 million. Actually, there's a little bit of revenue that comes in for fuel tax. So the net cost to the general fund of street related items in the 25 budget would be $4.1 million. So the Transportation Benefit District would supply 2.25 of it in the first year, 3 million of that in the next year, freeing up those dollars that we're spending on that currently to keep other core services intact.
Excuse me, Barbara.
Yes.
On that, so are you saying that the Transportation Benefit District would not backfill current funding levels that we spend on transportation?
No, it will not completely backfill. It will only backfill a portion of it.
So we still be using portions of the so-called general fund to hit those marks?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
And if we do that, you're saying we will still have a surplus of $500,000-$600,000 at the end of every annual budget or every year?
At least for this biennium, costs go up. That will probably eat away. It could eat away at that excess over
I
time.
understand that.
But yes, for this biennium.
So we have a formula that will my interest is that we maintain this and that we don't pass a Transportation Benefit District and at the same time cut the funding we put in the transportation. Is that what will happen?
No. So essentially what would happen is for that first year, the 4.1 million, 2.25 of it would come from the Transportation Benefit District and the remainder would come from the general fund.
Understand. I now I understand what you're doing.
Okay.
Thank you.
That is the end of my brief portion of this. And so I'll turn it over to Ken.
So the Transportation Benefit District objectives, TBD creates a dedicated funding source. It ensures sustainability and consistent funding for street operations, maintenance, and capital without relying solely on general fund revenue. It reduces general fund obligations for street operations, maintenance, and capital funding, which are the capital projects we have on our lists and we will discuss tomorrow night. But equally important, and I really want to stress this, it can pay for the work the street division does every day. This includes the operation and maintenance activities Scott Hill's team does, and including the labor of his team, which is key in creating the positive offset to the general fund of around the 3 million annually. This slide shows the current roadway network health in September of this year. The curve on the left illustrates how it's cheaper to keep good roads good when performing preventative maintenance at $6 per square yard. Over, say, 36 years, we would do a total of 3 chip seals at $18 per square yards. Versus if we were to let the road get to a very poor condition, we would pay around $80 per square yard to reconstruct, which is just over 4 times as expensive. In the lower left corner, you'll see the actual roadway miles, and that's the current percentage of each category's roadway condition. So 62% of our roads are in the very good category. And I'll point out that 3.7% are down in the very poor category. One aspect to keep in mind while looking at this slide is the street division maintains all of the right-of-way roads you see on this map. This includes the very good roads at the top, all the way to the red roads in poor condition at the bottom. They perform a variety of tasks, including the things everyone thinks about, like potholes, but also less obvious items like street signal systems, lighting, emergency response, and more. A few of the items the transportation benefit district will pay for is yellow curb. This is primarily in the downtown business core, but we also have yellow curb near the hospital, schools, and fair, along with some of our busier parks properties. This would allow us to move from a 2 to 3 year cycle to annual maintenance. Vegetation is another high priority item that not only makes the city look good, but it is a huge safety concern when vegetation blocks sight for vehicles and pedestrians along our roadway. The transportation benefit districts can pay for this. Similarly, dumped items and litter is a high priority for the street division, along with graffiti. It's one of those items where the goal is to remove as soon as we can to discourage further dumping. This is hugely important to have dedicated funding to assist in fighting this blight. The traffic calming program is for the most part a citizen initiated program. Many times the street division will complete projects with city forces, as shown in this photo, at a fraction of the cost it would be to contract it. But by either method, the transportation benefit district would be dedicated funds. Many requests will include sidewalks and accessibility ramps. The ramp shown here was up in the top left. The ramp shown here was completed by the street division, which helped bicycles transition from the paved roadway to the Riverwalk Trail, along with pedestrians, where no ramp previously existed. It's important to have funding to complete these projects, as many times these are outside planned activities and we have on our list, but are still a request that was initiated. Sidewalk repair and replacement at the bottom left is one of those tasks where we do have a list of projects to complete, but many times we are forced to grind and keep the surface in a usable state as we wait for funds to replace. I think this is one of those items where the Transportation Benefit District will help the street division staff immensely, giving them the funds to complete replacements. Alley maintenance is one of those items not much thought about as part of Scott's and the street division's responsibility. But returning an alley to driving condition takes a considerable amount of staff time and material. This is again something the Transportation Benefit District can pay for. As I finish up with the snow and ice, this is only a small portion of what the street division does daily, but all the tasks they complete are eligible to be funded by the Transportation Benefit District, which includes snow and ice fighting. One of the many tasks that takes a considerable amount of staff time, in this case to keep our roads clear, which includes routes to our regional hospital and our limited roads that go from the valley to South Hill. Transportation Benefit District spending plan. If a Transportation Benefit District is approved, staff recommends spending the plan as priority 1, street operation and maintenance based on the available funding. And this includes street staff time, or, the staff. Anyway, priority 2, remaining balance to support street operations, maintenance capital, and street capital improvement projects. This is the information shown previously in the presentation, but it's important to emphasize that these are costs of street operation and maintenance, including street staff funding and the programs that keep our road network operating, which are currently paid by the general fund. Without a transportation benefit district, all of this funding would have to be considered in any budget cut scenarios. which would directly impact level of service of all the many tasks the street division performs citywide. Oops. Thanks. So any questions?
Member Dorr.
Thank you. So I have a couple of questions. One on the alley maintenance. City Manager Kirkley and I just had a discussion on this. I have had some concerns expressed to me about that. And this one in particular, Steve said, is not entirely a city property, so we don't maintain it. So which alley maintenance, what are you talking about in this category?
Oh, and alley maintenance. So not all alleys are maintained by the city, but any that are actual dedicated public right of way, we do maintain. So the majority of alleys in the downtown probably fall into the public category, but not every single alley, downtown is a public. Private alleys, we do not maintain.
Okay, so we're not increasing. This is, you're just talking about the things that you currently do. could
Yeah,
be funded by this.
I was,
Okay.
yeah, it was a considerable amount of staff time. And when we do alleys, they belt load out all the material, down approximately 12 inches if they're going to rebuild it. And then they haul that all out and then they bring it all back in and grade it. So it just takes, I just pointed out that it takes a considerable amount of staff time and material.
So which leads to my next question. Do you have the staffing to be able to accomplish this additional work?
So we currently do the work that I pointed out. Yellow curb will increase, to annual maintenance, but we do have the staff that we can perform that work.
But so maybe I'm misunderstanding, because it seems like what I'm hearing is that this would allow additional monies to streets. And I thought that this would result in us getting some of these things done. So all of this is going to do is just allow us to maintain the status quo.
So the money right now that we're looking at will be an offset of the general fund money. So what was, previously, if we went back to the slide where we were showing the 2 million, that will be an offset and it still stays 4.2.
Okay, so I understand the offset. I just for some, I don't know, the public isn't getting an additional benefit from this. They're just getting the maintain. And that was where I was wrong. I was hoping that they were actually getting something more with the streets, but I appreciate the answers. Thank you.
Other questions? Councilmember Gilliam.
This actually is a question for Barbara. So sorry, Barbara, bring you back up. I was curious about how we actually could land on the $3 million income from this 0.1% sales tax increase. And if we were to somehow create more sales tax in our community, like had a more robust business and more robust opportunities for people to shop in Puyallup, would that number ever increase?
So yes, that number could increase. So the logistics of what would have to happen is each month when we get our sales tax payment, I would have to figure out what proportionate share belongs to the transportation benefit district. And so those numbers could fluctuate. And if sales tax overall grows, then yes, it could conceivably be more than the 3 million.
Okay. I actually am pretty impressed with the fact that this concept helps preserve our streets. And I would love to actually find ways for our community to be able to sell more things. So promote local business.
Sure.
So that we can maybe add an added benefit to our citizens through incredible streets, especially considering once a month we have 1 million people come just for the fair on top of everything else. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Does Puyallup have any recent history of utilizing this tax?
No,
This is the first time.
first time.
Okay.
In fact, as I understand it, this is the only opportunity to do that. And Tacoma, Auburn, number of cities have done this.
So this is a relatively new opportunity for cities to utilize. This is not a historical tax that could be.
No, it's been
utilized.
around. I'll let.
Let's get
Steve-
some education on this. I'd like to get.
Yeah.
some
So
background.
it's actually been around for a while. And so in your packet that you in your email pack that you received, we provided a listing of all the various cities in the region that use this. Many do the vehicle license fees, but also many do the 1/10 of 1%. So this has been a tool that has been available to cities for a while, and the city has just never used it.
How long has this been out? Do we have any approximation on when this transportation benefit tax has been available to cities?
At least a decade. Yeah, at least a decade.
So we've had it for 10 years and never utilized it
Right.
in the city of Puyallup. Okay.
And
It's helpful to know.
that money came out of the general fund.
Yes, gotcha. Okay, so this is a new opportunity to fund. Are we limited only to one tax benefit district tax per 10 years?
Yes.
If we decided we needed another 1/10 of 1%, are we limited to just one?
All you do
Just
is
asking the questions.
you just reaffirm what you did before. You either keep it going or you.
For 10
end
years,
it.
but in other words, we can't have two going at the same time.
No.
So
Am I-
so the city
Understand this.
council can approve 1/10 of 1%. The
Right.
voters could also then go for more if they wanted to. So for instance, Gig Harbor, the city of Gig Harbor, the voters approved 2/10 of 1%, and the council approved 1/10. So you could go out to ask for even more,
But
but you're
council related, we have authority to go 1/10 of 1% without voter approval.
correct.
Anything beyond that would require voter approval.
Correct.
Okay, that's good to know.
Would would the voter approval be limited to one?
Voter approval can go up to 3/10. Yeah, 3%. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Good
For
to
the
know
whole
these things.
district.
Yeah. Okay, that's good information. I'd like to offer, and I know that Ken mentioned that all of these things are going to be happening no matter what anyway. And whatever it's worth, if there's priorities on those things that we're doing with this transportation benefit district tax augmentation, I'd love to see emphasis on traffic calming, sidewalk repair and replace, and then alley maintenance. The other ones are certainly important, but seems to me those three are get a lot of feedback on that, and not that the other ones aren't important. I just hope that there's budget and emphasis, in my opinion, at least focusing on some of those. Thank you for that presentation. I think it's an interesting opportunity to utilize pretty minimal. $1 per $1,000 in spending is pretty minimal hardship to most purchasers that are purchasing, $1,000 of stuff. $1 isn't that bad, but yet it does provide some offset to help the citywide budget, and then sharing that load with not solely upon the burden of the residents of Puyallup, but those who shop in Puyallup can also share the burden of that too. So seems to be an interesting concept. Thank you.
Yeah, let me note that last time we discussed this, when we had the presentation, it was brought up that there was concern about the auto dealers because their sensitivity to sales tax. And this last week, I spent City Manager Steve Kirkley and myself visited 3 of the largest dealers in the city of Puyallup out on the River Road across the river in that area. And all of them were absolutely in favor of this. They felt it wasn't an impediment. And in fact, were very complimentary of how the council has been operating. So there is also provisions to where a person will pay the sales tax based on where they live, not just where they purchase it. And that was a federal provision that was put in place years ago, recognizing that more and more people are buying things online. So the impact with car dealers is not what it once was. So just want to pass that on. Let's see, are there? Okay. Is there any further presentation? Oh, Councilmember Dorr, would you like to ask?
Yes, please. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Couple of questions. One, when Councilmember Johnson's question about can there be more than one made me ponder, and I want to clarify, were you asking on that particular issue on the TBD that it could more than one TBD be running simultaneously? Or were you asking, I thought at first, and now I have the question, even if it isn't, does the council have the authority to do an additional 1/10 of 1% for something else?
Yeah, correct. In other words, hypothetically, let's say the council decided they wanted to support this 1/10 of 1% this year. And then we find out that we have other needs coming up. Could we do another one next year? That's where I got the clarity. We can't do that. So
On the
we-
TBD.
yeah,
Okay,
we
yeah,
have
'cause
one shot at it and that's it. Otherwise, it has to go before the voters.
Okay.
That's how I phrased the question and how I understood the answer.
Okay, that helps me. And I was thinking about whether or not we can implement additional 1/10 of 1%, but I know that we can. I mean, if you look at some of our neighboring jurisdictions, the councils have done that, but I don't, anyway, okay, I just had that question. And then I do have a question on the other cities is why I mean, before I ask the question, be going to be very clear. I don't want to do a car tab increase, but I'm interested in knowing why some of the cities have a $40 vehicle license and some have 20, and why did staff land on, maybe it's by county, I'm not sure, why they landed on their analysis at $20.
So by state law, you can, so speaking to the vehicle license fee, the tab fee, you have to, council can start at $20. And I forget the exact time frame it is. How many years? 2 years. And then council can again impose another $20. So council can do the $40 tab fee up to $40. You can go out to the voters for $100 in tab fees. That is allowed. So these cities where you see the 20 or the $40, it's because that city council has increased those tab fees. And the reason why we're not recommending the tab fees is, as the finance director said, it just would not generate the revenue needed for the general fund imbalance. And it is only for tabs that are purchased in Puyallup, whereas the sales tax obviously is paid by people who don't necessarily live in Puyallup, but shop in Puyallup.
Okay, and then as far as the car dealers, I appreciate that staff and Mayor Castema talked with them. I also had feedback from them post that meeting, and they initially, my understanding is, I didn't speak with all of them, only two, that they wanted the car tab option first, but they understand that we need to do this, or that, why we're doing, I shouldn't say that we need to, but why we're considering this. And they did appreciate the outreach. So I'm glad that we had that conversation. Keeping our stakeholders in the loop is important. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Whitting. Oh, I'm sorry. It's very obvious there. I apologize. Thank you, Councilmember Adler, for telling me.
I'm quiet as a mouse over here.
That's okay.
I'm told that I need to keep my mic closer. I'm in your peripheral vision. There's lots of reasons to neglect poor Councilmember Whitting. I just wanted to take a moment to frame this conversation a little bit, and some of it's just background and it's something to think about, and some a little less so. First off, we saw our numbers tonight that 81% of our city budget is coming from taxes. And of that, 73% of our taxes come from sales tax and 26% from property tax. And, in other localities throughout the country, a lot of them have a three-legged stool. They have a property tax, a sales tax, and a income tax. And there's benefits to having that diversified source of revenue from the standpoint that if your sales are down, your property tax is going to carry you and your income tax may carry you. If you're in a recession and income tax is down, then property tax may carry you. It's diversifying your revenue stream that makes for a stronger financial situation. So we're pretty dependent here on sales tax. And the state government has seen fit to limit what we can do with our property tax. to a lesser extent for sales tax. So this transportation benefit district would increase our sales tax, which would make us additionally dependent on sales tax. So, you know, I prefer that that's not the case. I'm not saying that that should affect our decision here tonight, but it's just, again, I want to mention that, that it is making us more dependent on our sales tax. And then on top of that, income tax is a progressive tax. If you make more money, you pay more tax. Property tax is a progressive tax. So if you own more property, then you pay more tax. So if you're living in your car and not having much income, then you don't pay much tax, much property tax or much income tax. But you do pay sales tax. So sales tax is a really regressive tax, and Washington State has one of the most regressive, top 1 or 2 most regressive tax structures in the country. So we're either in the top 2%, the worst 2% in terms of regression, or the top 4%. So this is going to take Puyallup as a city a little bit further that direction. Now, again, I just say that because I think it's important to be thinking about that, but we don't have many tools in our toolbox, so we've got to use the tools that we have. And the Transportation Benefit District is a really important tool that we have in our toolbox to deal with a significant budget issue. So again, I just have to say that because I think it's important that we think that way. And maybe as we talk to our state legislators, we say that it'd be nice to, if you could reduce our sales tax potential and increase our property tax potential. So we, just not increase taxes, but change where we're getting them from. The other thing that's a little more apropos to our conversation tonight and our decisions tonight, if we do this, a 1% transportation benefit district, we see that we have some money left over. And I haven't heard a plan for what we would do with that. Obviously, we could spend some more money on our roads. We could do many things with that. But we've got some big bonds, a lot of councilmatic bonds in order to fund our public safety building. And I'd kind of like to think about taking the funds that we're redirecting from the extra funds that we're redirecting from our transportation funding and talk about maybe issuing a few fewer councilmatic bonds or reducing the term of them. Director Lopez can talk about the feasibility of doing that, but having 30-year bonds, that's a long-term commitment, and we're able to do some of what we're doing now because the bonds for some of our other buildings are getting paid off, and that frees up money to do the public safety building. And in 30 years, we're going to have some other buildings that are going to need some help. And it'd be nice to be able to do something about them in 20 years as opposed to 30. So I'm just thinking long-term here, and I would, one of my ideas for how we spend the extra money would be to spend some of our current money to reduce the expenses we'll have to pay in the future and the interest that we'd have to do to fund those bonds in the interim, so we get an extra bang for our buck. So that would be a proposition I would propose. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other further questions? You bring up a very interesting point, Councilmember Whitting. You're right. There will be those funds. They could be spent on increased sidewalks, they could be in, you spent on increased surfacing, resurfacing of roads, or they could be spent on buying down bonds. There are many different options, and I think it's good that everyone here thinks about those possibilities before we actually get into the nitty gritty of crafting the budget. So we'll be bringing these ideas forward as we go further, with the final passage expected at the end of November is what we're looking at. So Councilmember Gilliam.
I'll be honest, it's getting really late for me, so I was hesitant on putting my little name tag up. Just considering the budget, not the transportation benefit district concept. So, Steve, this is more directed to you. And maybe again, because it's late, we can process another time, but because we're on the topic of the budget, do we have any city buildings that we can sell off to help offset the budget? Is there anything that we don't want, don't need, is extra weight that we can kind of trim the fat on and put that towards our budget deficit?
Yeah, so the most immediate property that we would likely be able to sell, and we talked about this previously, is the site, the old lumberman's site up on the hill. That obviously was purchased for the public safety building, and so once we have a new police station in the leased facility, then that would become the one that would be the most immediate. And then obviously there is the property downtown, the school district property. That's another one that was purchased by the city for a mixed use development. That's the only other building that I can think of.
And is that something that we would want to try to consider to help with our budget, or is that we have developmental plans for those things?
Yeah, I think for the those will be questions that you'll get to answer and give direction on, council will. But I think obviously for the lumberman's property, that will be the most immediate one. We need to get the the police facility done before we make that final decision and cut the ribbon, so to speak. But that would be something that certainly council will make that decision.
Could I just chime on just to tag on that question? Steve, isn't there one other piece of property that it's been kind of for sale for a while? It's right there on the corner of 94th, and that corner has been sitting kind of vacant. I know we haven't had much luck selling it, but is there any resurgence of ability to sell that?
That's the 31st and 9th. It was, the city bought that years ago for a fire station. And so that does, there are some wetland, critical area issues with that. We did sell a portion of that.
Right,
So
I
that's why
remember
the DeVita kidney dialysis center is there. We sold off that portion. The remaining portion, there's not a lot of use. We've tried before and just have not been able to find buyer. So that's one. And the other component is, as we are looking at 9th and widening 9th and expanding that intersection there, we would need some of that land. So I'm not sure if there's even really a viable parcel left there.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah. It just, okay, great, thanks.
Okay. Deputy Mayor King?
Nope.
Oh, okay. All right. Councilmember Whitty. No, go ahead.
I just had another thought for how we could spend some of that money. And again, I like to think about the things that where we're going to need to spend money. And I think the judge has left us, but we've still got to do something about that, our court. So, I want to be sure that we're factoring that into our thinking as we consider what to do with our funds. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. At this point, if there's no further comments, we'll move on to citizen comments. And we have someone who's been waiting here patiently, Paul Romich. If you would like to come forward. Again, we'll suspend with the reading of the rules. I think you could read them to us probably better than we could read them to you. So go ahead. And by the way, I'll give him 3 minutes, please.
It's fine. 2 minutes.
Correct.
Fine. Yeah.
2 minutes. 2 minutes.
Yeah.
I 3 minutes for Paul. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Mayor Casima. Appreciate that. I'd just like to thank everyone, especially staff, for the awesome reports. Uh, just kind of diving right into it. I mean, you all have big decisions here regarding, costs, but uh, think about, I'm in support of the Transportation Benefit District because as Councilmember Gilliam mentioned, hey, if we have a good year, we'll have extra funds we can tap into for things beyond maintenance, right? And then, actual improvements. And in addition, by establishing a strong, funding source for maintenance, it also lets us keep on track with, best practices better. So it just lets our roads stay safer in that regard. So something that might not be a huge capital improvement, but just more of a maintenance type improvement, like a restripe, or like a basic restriping. Hey, let's make this more clear. That can be something that could be included as or that can be covered by that. And then in addition, as Mayor Castleman mentioned, was, let's keep working to be better, right? And, that transportation benefit district really helps, secure that funding source. So, hey, we can push the one thing that, people have the most frustration with in our city forward. And then finally, tying this all back to the comp plan, as I like to do, uh, you all have the ability to push the revenues as well, the city. And it might not be for, your staff time or your time here on council, but it'd be for future councils. And, and by enabling more growth and whatnot, right, we'll be able to tap into property tax and more sales tax revenue sources. And especially if you do it in an efficient manner, like downtown was able to get a sewer pipe 100 years ago. So just thinking about that, what they were able to do 100 years ago, hey, maybe we can do a little bit more if we build a little more efficiently. Thank you.
Thank you. So with that, we'll go ahead and we will conclude this evening's meeting. Thank you all very much. Tomorrow will be chaired by Deputy Mayor King. I have a very minor surgery at 6 a.m. that my doctor has said that I may not be in a state where I can chair this meeting. So in respect to all of you, I will have the Deputy Mayor King be the person who will chair that meeting. So I will may attend by Zoom. So I will miss you, but that is the way it goes. So with that, we are adjourned. Thank you.